I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Wednesday, October 22nd, 2025. The time is 9:59 in the morning. Apologize for the late start. I don't have a good excuse. We are in room 412 of the Johnny Wilson Building, and the subject of this hearing, this is an oversight hearing, is charter school review and renewal in the district. Reading from the hearing notice, during school year 2024-2025, significant concerns emerged regarding the DC Public Charter School Board's charter review and renewal process. These concerns were heightened when two public charter schools opted to voluntarily relinquish their charters during the renewal process, leaving more than 500 students without a guaranteed school placement after the My School DC lottery had concluded. This disruption not only created uncertainty for families, but also raised broader questions about the transparency, timing, and effectiveness of the Public Charter School Board's oversight and decision-making process. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the charter review and renewal process for public charter schools in the District of Columbia. This hearing will focus on the criteria and procedures used by the Public Charter School Board to evaluate schools seeking charter renewal, including academic performance, operational effectiveness, financial stability, and community impact. The committee wants testimony from education stakeholders, including school leaders, parents, students, and advocacy organizations to assess how the current process aligns with the district's goals for equity, accountability, and quality in public education. The hearing will also explore suggestions to strengthen oversight and ensure that all students have access to high-quality educational opportunities. The record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, it will close at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, November 5th, 2025. So anyone who's testifying today, anyone who's not testifying today, if they wish to submit something, you have 2 weeks to do so, 5 p.m. November 5th. I'll say just a little bit more, and I'm sort of lifting from someone's testimony. This hearing should not be viewed as a criticism of the charter sector. We have two sectors, principal sectors for public education in the district, the traditional DC public schools and the charter sector. I would like to think that our charter sector is one of the most robust in the country. It certainly offers alternatives and important choices to residents of the district. We benefit from the fact that the way we govern our charter sector is through the Independent Public Charter School Board, so that it's not subject to quite the same political whims that we see with not independent authorizers. Because of the robustness of our charter sector, there are numerous options available to families, including Montessori, dual language, single gender schools, classical and expeditionary learning models, boarding schools, STEM-focused programs, alternative education, and adult education. Almost half of our students are enrolled in charter sector schools. And unlike what is often the focus of this committee, which is with the single LEA DC public schools, there are 66 LEAs in the charter sector. So quite a variety. Nonetheless, we as a committee are overdue in having oversight like this of the charter sector and specifically the review and renewal process. And so that's what today's hearing is about. The way we've structured this is we're going to hear from 3 individuals whom we invited who have, I don't know if it's fair to say expertise, but I will say have expertise with regard to these matters. And then we'll hear from public witnesses. The reason why I question the fairness of saying that some are experts is that probably everybody is an expert. But we will hear from 3 first. Ariel Johnson, who's Executive Director of the DC Charter School Alliance. If you would come forward, Pat Brantley, who's the Chief Executive Officer of the Friendship Public Charter Schools, and Kariga Rausch, who is President and CEO with the National Association of Charter School Authorizers. And I'm assuming that I'm assuming that he is virtual, which he is. I see him. So we're not going to put a clock on you guys. But that doesn't mean go on for 2 hours. I think I looked at your testimony and I don't think you'll go on for 2 hours. At any rate, Ms. Johnson, why don't you start? And good morning.
Absolutely. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and staff. My name is Ariel Johnson. I am the Executive Director of the DC Charter School Alliance, the membership organization for the 66 public charter schools across the district. I am also a resident of Ward 5. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on behalf of maintaining and strengthening high-quality authorizing for a strong review and renewal cycle in the district. Nationally, we've seen that the quality of authorizing is one of the most important factors in whether a charter sector succeeds or falters. For example, in places like Massachusetts and Denver, strong authorizers have ensured that only high potential schools open, that struggling schools improve or close, and that parents have confidence in the sector's integrity. Both states, city and state, have consistently touted some of the highest performing charter schools in the country. Conversely, in states where schools are allowed to authorize or shop, or where authorizers are politically incentivized to fund their schools inequitably or block access to facilities, we see inconsistent oversight leading to the proliferation of low performing schools that hurt and erode public trust. In the district, the authorizing responsibility for charter schools rests with the independent authorizer, the DC Public Charter School Board, PCSB, which was created under the School Reform Act and is separate from the traditional public school system. This structure aligns with what national best practices recommends. Because PCSB is singularly focused on chartering, it has developed specialized capacity and a performance framework in Aspire for monitoring performance and making review and renewal decisions. Through the independent authorizer model, DC enjoys the advantages of a clear mission and delineation between district and charter schools, focused governance and staffing solely dedicated to authorizing charter schools, transparency and accountability mechanisms that are built in via the performance framework, in this case it's Aspire. These are the same hallmarks that strong authorizers nationwide demonstrate. The National Association of Charter School Authorizers, NACSA, who you will hear from in just a minute, a highly regarded authority on authorizing, offers state policy recommendations advocating for statewide independent charter boards. This would ensure that hostile or capacity limited authorizers do not hinder high quality applicants. For the past 30 years in DC, the independent PCSB model has helped ensure stability, providing high quality seats that are sustainable over time and serve a broad spectrum of students with a plethora of unique models. However, even in a strong system, continuous improvement matters. Over the past year, the DC Alliance has worked very closely with PCSB and school leaders to surface opportunities to strengthen the review and renewal process, which is one of the authorizer's most powerful tools for accountability. We've identified several areas for improvement, many of which we know the PCSB has begun addressing. So, timeline and alignment. In the last few years, reviews and renewals occurred between March and June after the My School DC lottery closes. Families deserve to know a school's future before they make enrollment decisions. This year, PCSB is moving toward early review cycles and better alignment with the enrollment calendar, though, where applicable, we would like to see these decisions made even earlier so that students have as many options available to them as possible. Transparency and clarity. In the past years, schools have sometimes received complex reports or new conditions with very little time to respond. PCSB is now working to provide clear communication and earlier communication about data, likely outcomes, and goal attainment, but ideally this needs to happen before the review begins. Consistency. Conditions and recommendations have not always been applied consistently across schools. We are collaborating with PCSB to refine those policies and ensure that expectations are predictable, transparent, and fair. Stronger data management. In some cases, schools have reported discrepancies in data that have required time-intensive revision or unnecessary frustration. We recommend increasing staff expertise to ensure data provided, especially during review and renewal season, is clear and accurate. And stakeholder communication. Some LEAs reported being surprised by recommendations. PCSB is responding by holding effective organization meetings, EOMs, earlier in the year, and improving communication between staff and schools throughout this process, but that also still needs improvement. We hope these refinements, learning from experience, tightening systems, providing opportunities for continuous feedback, and keeping students and families front and center will once again move the PCSB to the forefront of the most effective authorizers around the country. The DC Alliance has also stepped up to help schools navigate the review and renewal process more effectively in partnership with PCSB. We've contracted with an expert to provide 100 hours of additional support to schools. This year we supported 20 schools up for review with overviews, mock review interviews, and a resource guide. And support is tailored to each LEA based on need. And we've already started to engage with schools slated for review in 26-27 to ensure early preparation. We'll provide orientation sessions for the 16 schools going through review or renewal, targeted data coaching, and preparation for board meetings. This preparation includes one-on-one initial meetings with each LEA, reviewing academic data, including prior PCSB charter goals update, the OSSE report card, the qualitative site review report, follow-up letter from the effective organization meetings, follow-up meetings as needed to prepare, supporting, interpreting, and responding to preliminary charter review reports, and then preparation for the site visit as applicable, and then mock interviews. Our goal is to ensure that every school, especially those led by new leaders or small LEAs, understands expectations, has access to quality data, and can respond effectively to PCSB's oversight. That partnership strengthens the entire sector. The DC Council should be proud that the School Reform Act established one of the strongest authorizing models in the country. Our independent authorizer, PCSB, has delivered a portfolio of diverse, innovative, and high-quality public charter schools that educate nearly half of DC students. Options available to families include Montessori dual language, single-gender schools, classical and expeditionary learning models, boarding schools, STEM-focused schools, alternative education, and adult education. I urge the Council to continue supporting DC's independent authorizing model and to ensure that PCSB has the resources and flexibility it needs to sustain high standards, transparent processes, and a thriving public charter sector. Thank you for your time and continued partnership in ensuring every child in the district has access to great public education.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Pat Brantley.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and members of staff. I am Pat Brantley, Chief Executive Officer of Friendship Public Charter School. For nearly 3 decades, I've helped to build, grow, and sustain schools that now serve thousands of students. When I testified last December about the closure of Eagle Academy, I spoke about lessons learned from trying to stabilize that one school. My concern then and now is not about any single case, but about how the timing and execution of review and renewal decisions can either support or destabilize families and schools. The work that needs to happen going forward is not about more oversight. It's about when oversight occurs. Even well-intended systems can become unpredictable when decisions come too late in the school enrollment cycle. So before I get to the heart of my remarks, I have one request. Resist calls to make charters report more, comply more, or duplicate data. Every single data point needed to assess school health, whether academic, financial, or operational, is already collected. The question is what happens to that information and when? What happens to ensure a stable educational landscape for children and families? Last school year, more than 500 students were left without guaranteed placements after the My School DC lottery, not because of missing data, but because the review process came too late. Historically, PCSB began reviews in the fall, giving schools time to respond or plan transitions before families made enrollment decisions. Yet last school year, reviews happened in spring through June after the lottery window had closed. The result? Uncertainty for hundreds of students and avoidable disruption. The lesson is clear. Even strong accountability fails if it's out of sync with the city's enrollment calendar. Accountability must protect, not surprise families. And I'll say it again. Accountability must protect, not surprise families. We've done this better before. When PCSB staff recommended revocation of Ideal Public Charter School during the 2018-2019 review cycle, the process had actually begun 2 years in advance. The school was warned early, years early, and given clear performance thresholds so that there was no surprise when they received a preliminary review report in the fall of 2018. That report and the hearing scheduled a month after the report occurred before the lottery window opened. Because communication was timely and transparent, Ideals Board was able to make decisions and notify families before EdFest in December. No one was left scrambling in June. That is the standard we must return to. We have an opportunity to get this right by leveraging better timing and better data alongside Aspire. I mention Aspire to commend the work that's been done to develop a more modern take on accountability and school quality. Aspire is far from perfect, but it does represent progress. It's a system that asks not only how are your scores, but rather how well do you serve each student and how are you reflecting your mission. This is important. The original Charter Compact has always meant autonomy in exchange for accountability. Oversight should intensify for schools missing the bar, not shrink for those schools that are exceeding it. The issue is not a lack of data. Aspire and existing financial and operational monitoring gives us that. It is how and when we act on what we already know. I therefore offer 6 recommendations for improved process. 1, align the calendar. Publish review findings and conditions before My School DC opens in December, and finalize votes before the lottery window closes in early February and March. 2, use conditions wisely and timely. In every charter's 5-year review cycle, it's known by year 3 if a school is not meeting goals. The laws of averages say that it won't meet those goals over a 5-year period unless it accelerates in years 4 and 5. That's when time-bound conditions, notifications, and effective organization meetings make the most sense, when schools have time to improve. Instead, start conditions in year 5 have led to abrupt relinquishments and displaced families. Number 3, transparent metrics and rules. Schools need clear, stable targets and business rules. We depend on transparency, clarity, and accuracy from the PCSB. Recent incidents of business rules being unclear and data not being accurate, we can trust in the authorizer and in the review process. Number 4, guaranteed due process. Provide schools a defined window to review evidence, correct errors, and submit updates prior to PCSB votes on reviews and renewals. Number 5, student-first contingent planning. If non-renewal or relinquishment is in the realm of possibility, there must be proactive plans before the lottery window closes for students and for families. Number 6, take a deeper look at financially fragile schools. Spring is the most vulnerable period for charter cash flow. Per pupil funds are the lowest and reimbursable grants are still pending. For financially strained schools, it's a predictable perfect storm. Oversight should focus on this window, looking closely and acting quickly before a temporary cash shortage becomes a crisis. Strong accountability and stable schools are not competing goals. They are 2 sides of the same promise. When oversight is timely, transparent, and proportionate, families trust the process, educators can plan responsibly, and our sector remains strong. By restoring early review timelines and clear communication, we can ensure that no future renewal cycle leaves children without secure placements. Predictability builds trust, and trust sustains quality. Thank you for your oversight and for centering students and families in the discussion. I look forward to the outcomes of this hearing and seeing the fruits of DC PCSB's efforts to ensure that DC's accountability system is both rigorous and humane, and that it is worthy of the families that we serve.
Thank you, Ms. Brantley. Mr. Roush.
Good morning, and thank you, Chairman Mendelson, members of the Committee of the Whole, and staff for the opportunity to engage on a critical function of authorizing charter school reviews and renewals. My name is Kariga Roush, and I serve students and families as President and Chief Executive Officer of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, or NACSA. NACSA is a national nonprofit that works with authorizers and policymakers to ensure that charter schools are excellent options for students and families. Grounded in NACS's principles and standards for quality charter school authorizing, which is our most complete description of authorizing best practices across the country, I wanted to highlight 4 things that we have observed about renewals, that is, renewal of the charter or the contract term, across the country that may be useful in your oversight work to ensure that renewals are done well. First, non-renewals are part of the work of authorizing. One of the hardest and most complex, yet critical parts of the job of authorizing is saying no more to schools that underperform. While closing a school for its inability to educate kids, use taxpayer resources well, or operate effectively is hard, it's part of the work of authorizing. A very hard part, yes, but vital to ensure that students access high-quality schools. Second observation, no surprises. When a charter school comes up for renewal, their performance record should be clear and transparent. Because a quality authorizer implements a comprehensive performance management accountability system and at least annually produces a report on each school's performance, sometimes for the general public, but at least for the individual schools, their leaders, and boards, the record justifying renewal or not should be clear. Now, that doesn't mean all schools will be happy, but how well they are doing should not be a surprise. Third, decisions must be made on the school's objective record and evidence, not solely on promises for the future. Quality authorizing grants renewals only to schools that have achieved the standards and targets in their performance framework or charter contract, and does not grant renewals on the basis of political or other external pressures, or solely on promises for future improvement, which is something we do see frequently across the country. Quality authorizing makes renewal decisions based on the strength of the school's record and how well they have educated students, not other factors. Finally, a strong renewal process over time should yield increasing trust and confidence that the decisions that are being made are in students' best interests. The ability to communicate expectations, help a wide range of stakeholders understand the what, why, and how of decisions should, over time, yield a renewal process that isn't universally loved. Schools that are consistently underperforming rarely embrace accountability, but will build trust and confidence among a wide range of key stakeholders. Before I close, Mr. Chairman, and answer any questions that you all may have, or however I can ever be helpful, it's important to complement parts of the original charter law in DC and decisions the council has made to ensure the quality of options for students attending charter schools in the district. A very strong part of your law is the option for long-term charter renewals for exceptional performance. When used well across the country, we've seen that kind of a provision to be a strong incentive to produce outstanding outcomes when coupled with strong ongoing reviews. Second, and maybe more consequential, is the decision to have an independent sole purpose authorizer like the DC Public Charter School Board, one of 18 states that have a sole purpose authorizer. We see in many places across the country that sole purpose authorizers professionalize the work of authorizing and are far less likely to make decisions based on political or external pressure, something I described above as a significant threat to quality renewals. Sole purpose authorizers tend to not have inherent conflicts, distractions, or disincentives to focusing on authorizing only high-quality schools. Coupled with confirming high-quality board members, which is clearly something you all have taken very seriously, having a sole purpose authorizer is a critical strength of the DC charter sector. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage. Be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Roush. Thank you, each of you, for your testimony. Looking at some of the statements that we received before the start of this hearing, and then Mr. Roush, in your statement, your second bullet, no surprises. I'm kind of surprised at all this attention to the issue of surprises. I don't know if you can speak, Mr. Roush, to DC, if you can, please, but how do these surprises come about? Well, why is this even an issue?
Well, from what I've heard in prior testimony, there are some adjustments that folks are making to making sure that the renewal process aligns with families and their ability to make informed choices moving forward, which I think is good and smart and wise. I will also say that sometimes that can be complicated. When an authorizer does their very best to align decision making, sometimes those decisions also do fall in the hands of schools to make. But it sounds to me, based on kind of what I've heard is kind of happening in DC, that some adjustments to kind of timelines of things seems like it will go a long way towards addressing important areas. The part that I was speaking to, Mr. Chairman, around no surprises is less about kind of surprises in timeline and more about surprises in record. As I indicated, a good authorizer, a school should know every year how they're doing relative to expectations, so that even if they don't like it, they at least know, how they're doing relative to that. So when you get to a point of renewal, there is a consistent record around how that school is operated, so that schools may disagree, but at least they've been given an opportunity and there has been a consistent level of information for school quality up until that point.
Ms. Brantley, as a CEO of an LEA, is there that kind of annual evaluation or performance report from the Public Charter School Board?
So at Friendship, we calculate and review all of our numbers fairly frequently, and so we know where we stand. But to address the broader question, first, the pandemic interrupted both the flow of data and the availability of test information. The PCSB responded by creating transitional rules for whether or not schools were meeting goals, but those rules weren't always transparent, nor did information flow on how well were you doing against those rules. Information that would go from the PCSB to boards was almost so dense that it didn't say, it's 15 pages of information, but is there an answer in there? Are we making or are we not? No, there wasn't, right? You literally, as a sitting school leader, probably could go through it and determine where you were, but that's not necessarily true for boards. I would also say that even for sitting school leaders, and I've spoken to many, it wasn't clear where the transitional rules fit for them. So I think that we've got one issue that is very much pandemic related and the absence of having PARC being given in a few years. I flagged that because when we moved to Smarter Balanced in the city, you could have it happen again in a couple of years, and we need to be prepared for it. But even where information did flow to schools, they were already in their review process before they were getting a clear statement on how they did. And that's why my testimony says it is a 5-year review cycle. If you are not making goals by year 3, again, the law of averages say you are not unless you really start to accelerate performance. And so we need a check-in in year 3 that is very clear and specific, and then annually we need those goals. And before going much further, because I think Arrow may also have an answer to this, I know today, actually I knew 4 weeks ago, how my schools did for the last school year. Because every measure on the charter board's report card has been given to me, either by OSSI or I collected internally. And so right now, we are hearing that we may not be getting that information from the charter board, their assessment of it, until later in the process. We need to make that information earlier when that data is there. If not for all 67 or so LEAs, for the ones that are threatened because their past performance suggests they may not make it again in the new year.
So part of what I heard you say, Ms. Brantley, is that you internally are doing assessments, if you will. But I'm assuming you're a large LEA. I'm assuming some small LEAs don't have quite the same capacity. Even if they did, not everyone is equal. And so you may be very good about reviewing internally, but not everyone is. So that speaks to the importance of the public charter school board providing this information.
It must come from the public charter school board, because even if I keep it internally, there may be a difference of opinion about the facts on the table or the data and how it is assessed. Also, the accountability systems are not only my performance as a standalone, but how I perform compared to other LEAs. And that is not data that each school is going to have independently. And so it has to come from the charter board so that it can be vetted and assessed within each charter school.
Is
And
that,
that's regardless of their size.
is that really fair for purposes of renewal to compare you to other charter school LEAs?
It's built into the frameworks. And so we look at growth. How well are our students growing versus students across the city who have the same characteristics? And so I do believe that it's fair. We want to know that schools are serving the children of the District of Columbia well. And so how you do that is to see whether or not there's relatively higher performance or lower performance in a particular school.
So Mr. Roush's statement said at least annually produces a report on each school's performance, and that's not exactly happening.
That is not. Annually, we may receive data. We don't receive an assessment, or are you making your goals or are you not?
And then that gets to the issue of surprise. So I've been focusing on you. Ms. Johnson, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, just to emphasize, I mean, there are only so many pathways that a school has. And so it shouldn't be unclear. You either the path, the goals that you've chosen, or you've adopted Aspire. There are only so many ways to get to goal. There shouldn't be any discrepancy if we're doing these annual reviews. But the thing that I really want to emphasize, none of that matters if there's discrepancy in the data. And we often see that a charter school, even when they're doing their own internal processes, and you named it, a single site or a small LEA may not have the same capacity as a LEA like Friendship that is well known for their high quality data and their performance. They could be doing their data work in isolation, but they don't have that comparison data with PCSB, or the PCS data is inaccurate, then again, you find yourself in a surprise situation. You might think you've met a pathway and you are way far off. And so we've seen that a couple of times in review. It's part of the work that we're doing at the DC Alliance, because sometimes we do have enough data from similarly situated schools to try to make our own internal comparisons to be able to help folks through as they're preparing for review, but it may not be enough. So it has to come from PCSB.
Well, how does the data become so inconsistent? And by that, I mean, how is it that PCSB can have, I'll say, one set of data and a LEA have a different set of data?
I don't think it's different sets of data. I think it's the way the data is calculated, where there's a discrepancy in how they're like, yeah, it's a calculation issue, not a set of data issue.
I agree with that. I would also say there are likely two reasons. One, it is the transparency of the rules. If I believe ninth grade on track includes what we do to catch kids up in the summer, and the charter board has changed to not count that, that means I might count more students as being on track, they might count less. So transparency of rules. Two, and I'll give an example. In the spring of 25, we were asked to re-verify data from 22, 23. And I said, well, I've closed the books on that. We met our goals. But I found out from other charters, they were also asked for that period. And so even at Friendship, we have the data, but it takes somewhat of a process to go back and vet thousands of records from 22, 23. And so I wonder, at a smaller school, they might just take the charter board's assessment, you didn't meet it, but they don't know that the underlying data came into question. And so I think that there are two reasons: the collection of the data and making sure it's clear and transparent, and at the end of each year saying met, not met. That would go a long way. But the other is whether or not business rules are transparent, stable, and clear to both sides of the table.
And Chairman, I want to be clear on that front. That's an expense for schools to have to go back and do that work. Now, I am not saying that this is a part of the work. Schools have to do what they have to do to make sure they are being in compliance with their authorizer. But when you say go back and review these records, for some of our schools, they don't have the capacity to do that. So they have to bring in outside support. We've also seen that as a challenge. And we have strong LEA leaders in this city who will volunteer their time and their support to help schools do that, but all schools can't rely on that either. And so you've got leaders who are trying to run their schools and also scrambling to try to now correct rules, business rules, or understand business rules and correct calculations from something that wasn't really their fault.
And from a couple years earlier.
Correct.
That's what's disturbing to me. I mean, if you're asked to look at your data from the school year 24-25, I think that's sort of reasonable. That's like the school year that just ended.
Yeah, it was 22-23. 24-25 is relatively reasonable because we were just there. The one thing that I would note, though, is that this is not an unknown. And to commend the Charter Board, they are looking deeply at that work. It came up in one of their hearings last year where the board members stated that through no fault of the school, there was missing data from a year and they could not assess whether or not the goal was met. And that's why I think it's important to focus on the future and that the process cannot be just providing sheets and sheets of data at the end of each year, but also saying, here's the data, and we agree that you met a pathway or that you met goals for that particular year.
Ms. Brantley, one of the points that, or comments I heard several times in your statement was return to earlier reporting or restore earlier reporting. So I'm not sure I've got that quite right, but the reviews this past school year were what, March to June?
They started in March, and I believe they ended in June.
And what happened? How did that come to be if it was earlier? Or what did it used to be?
I can't speak exactly to how it came to be. I can tell you that in the past, particularly for schools that may be more challenged, those reviews happened as early as November, maybe even late October, but certainly before the end of December because you're in the window of My School DC. And there are numerous examples sort of that happening. I mentioned one, which was Ideal. That was, in my case, that is an important process for schools where the challenges are academics and not meeting goals. But I do want to emphasize the point around finances, because if you look at one of the charters, there haven't been many over the most recent years, but one of the more recent ones, which was WMST, it was a springtime failure. And if you look at Eagle, which also had financial challenges, there was springtime knowledge that they probably couldn't make it into the next school year. And I just want to give an example, but not take too much time. If you have a school of 500, 600 students, it may have an annual budget of $20 million. Its expenses are about $5 million annually. The last 2 quarters of the school year, it is probably only getting $3 million in per pupil, and all of its reimbursable grants are probably outstanding. So you have $5 million in expenses, $3 million in incoming cash. Those are schools that we can know early that if they had an enrollment challenge in the fall, if they're not collecting grant revenue, that they probably are going to run into a cash flow issue. And so while November is important for academic quality, if those are the challenges for not meeting goals, the spring is important for every year diagnosing whether or not a school could literally hit a crisis point that it cannot make payroll and cannot continue. And so I know this is about reviews and renewals, but I think the important thing is about whether or not we are stably delivering schools in a stable way to families. And I wanted just to raise that to your attention.
Well, actually, you're reminding me, before the hearing, I dug up your statement from last December. And one of your comments or recommendations was, and I'm going to read this, the trajectory of metrics is as important as meeting the floors of each or not meeting the floors. A school that has thrived year over year at 44 days of cash, which is less than the 45-day floor, is likely okay. If Friendship goes from 150 days of cash to 50 still being above the floor, and does that in 1 year, likely we have burnt through cash. We are likely short of enrollment-based revenue to cover operating expenses, and someone should ask me why and what my plans are to recover.
Yes, I would emphasize that statement again.
Yeah, there
If
was.
someone cuts their cash to a third in one single school year, the question needs to be asked, why?
But I think that issue of trajectory of metrics maybe applies on the academic side as well. Just tossing that out, not intending to go too far with that. But Ms. Johnson, one of the things that struck me about your testimony, this isn't a criticism. You say we've contracted with an expert to provide 100 hours of additional support to schools. We're supporting 20 schools up for review with overviews, mock review, interviews, resource guide. We're already engaging with schools for next year. And then you say this includes one-on-one initial meetings, reviewing academic data, including prior year PCSB, charter goals, OSCE report card, QSR report, follow-up letter with effective organization meetings, follow-up meetings as needed to prepare for review, supporting, interpreting, and responding to preliminary charter review report, preparation for site visit. It sounds very adversarial.
No, not
And
at
I
all.
don't mean you're being adversarial, that the renewal process is very adversarial.
It is time intensive and it is expensive, and it requires a lot of, it requires so much more energy from a school leader to engage in this process, especially when it's not done when there are mistakes along the way. We try to step in and fill in the gaps there. And this is particularly for our smaller schools, because they just don't have the resources. I wouldn't say it's adversarial. It can be, and we've seen that as well. I would say there are a lot of components, and if those processes are not clear from the beginning, it makes it hard for a leader to engage in a thoughtful, transparent, and clear way.
So is this just another way of describing the problem of surprise?
Yes.
And if there was more, and I didn't understand this when I was reading the testimony before the hearing, but I think I'm sort of understanding it now. If there was more transparency, then there would be more transparency of what's going on, more transparency of what the Public Charter School Board is seeing, what the PCSB is thinking. If there was more transparency around all that, then maybe there wouldn't need to be all of this work that you're having to do to support schools.
I think we'll always have to support schools in that way because the process is the process. It's built into the framework. And we have no problem doing that. But we also want to ensure that if we are spending the resources and the capital to be able to help and support and engage schools in this way, that it's effective. When timelines shift or move, when we are expected to have a particular meeting on X date at X time, and that those meetings shift or change for different schools, that's tough for the school to adjust to. It's like an audit, right? When you have it's audit time for a business, you build that into your schedule. When things shift and move, now you have to figure out resources, staffing, all of that changes. Sometimes it runs into testing. Like that's a lot for a smaller school to be able to handle at one time. So that's why we try to push in where necessary.
Now, you also had in your statement, Ms. Johnson, consistency. Conditions and recommendations have not always been applied consistently across schools. I don't get that.
There have been times where schools feel like they have similar challenges and we are unclear if the conditions will be the same. If we know the conditions are going to be the same, and they've gotten, I will say, I want to give credit where credit is due. I think PCSB is working on this and they've gotten significantly better with pushback and working in partnership with them, both the DC Alliance and the sector as a whole. So I do want to name that. But there had been a point where these schools feel similar, their conditions should be similar, and they are not. And so then how are we to advocate for that school, or how are we to support that school if the conditions that show up are not aligned?
Now, how does the PCSB respond to that criticism?
They've responded by making some adjustments. They really have.
So inconsistency has gone away as an issue?
I would say that there are still some inconsistencies, but they are making improvements. I think the board now have a stronger understanding of what conditions should be for particular types of schools. And they've made it clear, without going into too much detail about how certain schools are doing, schools that are struggling should get the same conditions. We should know that going forward. X type of school with this financial issue will have this condition. X school that has these academic challenges will receive these conditions, and then we can engage in that way.
Now, yes, Mr. Roush.
Thank you, and Mr. Chairman. I wanted to just offer a thought as we're thinking and kind of talking about conditions of things we've seen across the country.
Please.
And in no way am I disagreeing with my esteemed colleagues that are also engaged in this, because I do agree some level of consistency is important. But I also wanted to offer that you also don't want your authorizer to become standardized in their conditions. You want them to have some consistency, but also to use evidence-based professional judgment. And that's because the degree to which things become standardized in the field and in the space can produce some really unintended consequences, right? Where if a school meets a certain thing, there's an automatic, this is the only thing that happens. You need to have a level of consistency so that's not wildly different, but you also don't want your authorizer to just standardize conditions, because then you will create additional challenges we've seen across the sector. And again, this is like more of one of degree in engagement, but I do just want to make sure to offer that you don't want for interventions or things that a school has to do that they need to respond to be standardized, number one. And also number two, it's very, very important that when there are areas where a school needs to do something different or better, that the authorizer not prescribe how they do it. It's important for these performance reports and things that folks are doing to be a mirror on how schools are performing, but not infringe on a school's autonomy to tell them how to fix their problems. We do see that in a lot of places across the country, that sometimes reports can become too prescriptive in telling the school, here's how to solve your problems. That's the responsibility of the school. It's the responsibility of the authorizer to be able to say, here are the things that we're seeing as challenges. It's really important for us to understand how you're going to fix those things, but not to prescribe here's the exact way that you have to fix the problem. Hope that's helpful.
No, I think that's fair. I mean, I think one of the values of the charter sector is that there is autonomy, and that needs to be lifted rather than repressed. And I also get what you're saying about not having just a standard rote, what do I say, response or requirements. Every school is unique, or every LEA is unique, and so there should be some nuance. But at the same time, what I'm hearing is that when LEAs look at each other, sometimes they're scratching their head. Why is it that what we got was such and they didn't?
And we can't have that because they talk to each other and they share. And when you're going through the review and renewal process, there's a cohort. So they inevitably are going to share what's happening amongst each other. And when I say, and I absolutely agree with what Mr. Roush is saying, but I want to emphasize when we talk about, Pat mentioned this in her testimony, student first. If we know there's a condition that might require closure, that has to be transparent and clear and happening early. And we can't guess what school is going to have that and what school is not going to have that, because then we get into a situation where we don't have the time to then place those students in a high quality, high performing option. We have to know that early enough, and we can't be guessing what school will get that condition.
Before there is a hearing of a charter school, and before the hearing report or the review report becomes public, there's a preliminary draft that is given to the school. In the past, we might get those drafts 60 days in advance, giving you time to vet all data, look at what's assessed, talk with the charter board and staff about why things may be different than what's been assessed, but at least know the direction you're going in. There are incidents last year where a school might have gotten a preliminary report with a revocation or a severe condition, or even a recommendation for closure, only days, a week in. So that is sort of one of the things that I agree, conditions, perhaps you can't have them be so standardized, but the timing and the process, and giving schools a chance for due process to raise things that may be errors and you might look differently about the assessment for the school, that is critically important. I would also say this: conditions on a charter in the past used to only be the most serious things and intended for improvement of schools. There are conditions now that a question should be asked: is this condition on a charter, a conditional charter approval, which sends all kinds of signals to families, to banks, to people that might finance schools about whether or not the school will continue? Are the conditions really significant enough to warrant attaching it to a charter? And so I know that the charter board is thinking about these things, and I can't say where they are with this, but let's think about a condition that several schools got last year, which is you will turn in a plan. If those schools don't turn in the plan, are they actually going to be closed? If they have improved in other metrics? I don't know the answer to that. My gut tells me probably not. And so I wonder about putting that as a condition when the public sees conditions as if the school doesn't meet it, they will close. So it shakes enrollment even further, which may hurt schools. It shakes whether or not you're in good standing with your loans, which hurts schools. And so I agree that maybe we cannot have such a standardized process for conditions, but I do think we need to look at whether or not the conditions are relevant, important, appropriate in size and scale for what it may mean later for the school. And timely. You need to know early so that you can plan. And reviews that may carry recommendations for revocation or a short continuance to see if you improve, that schools need to know that well before the public hearing so that they can either mount a defense or make other plans.
So one of the things that's striking me here is that some of these issues seem to be relatively recent, like the timing of the renewal process or the phasing and timing of the renewal process. The charter school board has been around for what, 30 years roughly? So why is this happening? And is that a fair question to ask? Maybe I'll ask it of Ms. Johnson. Why is that happening? I mean, it's not like there's anything new going on here or that causes a change in procedures.
I think Pat, who was here before me, would have a stronger answer to this question, but I do imagine that some of the challenges are because of we're still recovering from COVID issues. Again, Pat mentioned the traditional goals. We had some shifts. We had staff changes. There have been a lot of challenges trying to get schools back on track with. We weren't testing, like, so the all the data that we used to have just wasn't there in the same way. I've had to make some adjustments to ensure that there's some consistency across the board. But Pat was here prior to 2020.
Well, see, I was trying not to put her on the spot
I
because
know,
she's
but
an
I wasn't.
LEA.
I can't.
I know,
wasn't
but the
here.
Public Charter School Board doesn't authorize or reauthorize you. Ms. Brantley, if you,
I have a review coming up of not for 2 years. That said, I'm confident in both the integrity and the intent of the charter board. To be fair, I think what we have primarily talked about is capacity and data accuracy post-pandemic. And what I think the real challenge is, Chairman, and I think it's a one-time challenge, or at least I hope so, with a smarter balanced transition might shake that, is we would always get every year a PMF, a performance management framework, at least steadily from 15 forward. And so every year, most schools, if they adopted the PMF, probably had to meet a score of 50. Whether you got that late in the year or et cetera, you know every year if you hit a score of 50. But now let's imagine 1920, no PMF, no test altogether. 2021, no PMF, no test altogether. And then we're now in 21, 22, and the charter board is changing from the PMF to Aspire. Even now, there is no public information on how schools have done under Aspire. The charter board has run simulations. We have summative scores. We have a calculator so that I can calculate it for my schools. And so I think that some of what you are seeing is not having each year a PMF score that tells you I made 50 or I didn't. And that's why I'm suggesting that when the charter board does put out these more robust data things to schools that they also just say right on top of it, you met transitional goals or your pathway or you did not. And even if that is not made public, although I do wonder about not making it public, I think the public does need to have some inclination, that at least the school would know, and more particularly, not only the school leader, the boards of these schools. The boards of these schools have to know because they need to make good governance decisions.
But I'm looking at Mr. Roush's testimony, at least annually produces a report on each school's performance. That's got to be more than just a score of you met 50 or not. So I think what I'm hearing from you is at least the score gave the school a sense of whether they were doing okay. But what I've also heard in the testimony is something a bit more robust that talks about just how the school's doing, what the board is thinking, or the board staff is thinking. And that used to happen, and then it stopped happening.
It used to happen much earlier than what it is happening now, and the score was important. And I know that that might sound trivial, but when you think about a 5-year review, the charter board and all charters have to meet 3 things. They have to meet their academic goals, and for most charters, that is the PMF, so the score of 50. They have to be financially stable or financially viable, and they have to be legally sound. If you go back through history, most schools are getting major conditions or revocation/closure or relinquishing. It's been about the academic part of it. That's not saying the other 2 aren't true. There are schools that have closed off cycle for finances, and there's at least one that it was because of governance. But during the 5-year review cycle, if I'm aiming at what is the most important measure, it is typically the academic one.
Okay. So that's helpful. But then I'm looking at your statement, Ms. Brantley, talking about ideal, that the preliminary review report in the fall. So COVID didn't change the timing there.
That was in 2018
18.
that they got the preliminary review report. It may have been as early as October. Their hearing wasn't until November, but my school DC did not open until December.
Yeah.
At EdFest, they sat across from us, Friendship, and let families know that you shouldn't enroll with us.
So that goes back to my question, which I was not trying to focus on you. I was trying to make Ms. Johnson uncomfortable, which
Fine.
is what happened. Because if the charter school board got it that in 2018, when I didn't have oversight over schools, let's do the evaluation in the fall. And here we are. I mean, this is sort of new to me, not this month, but beginning, I guess, with Eagle last year, that these decisions need to happen more quickly. Why are we just relearning this?
We're not. That's the point. 2018 was a different time for a different year. We had different tests. We were testing. We had, like, Pat just named it, right? So we went through the pandemic. We had to take a pause on testing. There was no PMF. And right as that was transitioning, they were building Aspire. So I think there's a lot of, and again, we can talk about now that Dr. Walker Davis and Ms. Wright explain their own staffing challenges or model, or however they want to talk about that when they testify. But there are also capacity challenges when you're making all of those shifts at one time. So I think what we're trying to do is just get back to a process like 2018, because that process did work. So I think to the point that was made earlier, this isn't, PCSB trying to be nefarious or just not working hard, or leadership that doesn't want to try. There's a lot of transition that's happened in the last couple of years, and we just need to get us back on the right track to ensure that we're getting data earlier and that we're more clear and transparent, since there's been so many additions or shifts in the last 5 years.
So thank you. I think you've been very kind. I want to touch on Aspire. I don't know how far I want to go with that, but there was some testimony that I was reading before the hearing that was very critical of Aspire. And I'm at the moment not seeing where it is. Is Aspire, which is brand new, Is that a problem with the renewal process right now?
You know, Chairman, we worked really hard to get Aspire to a place where schools, well, that was a place that was palatable for schools. There are still some challenges. I think Pat can speak specifically to some of the high school challenges around growth that we still have not addressed yet, or not addressed fully. I do worry about Smarter Balance and how that shifts how Aspire operates. This is a known issue now, and that both PCSB and OSSI are aware of, but that does put some flux in how Aspire will operate when there is a shift in not an apples to apples comparison between tests. Pat, I'm sure you will have some thoughts.
We had the PMF for a number of years, and when it was first rolled out, there were many, many voices raised in opposition to it. Aspire, I think there were people in the community that hoped for a new framework that completely sort of blew up the way that we think about assessing schools. And in some ways, Aspire stayed too traditional, with an emphasis on, yes, test scores, absolute achievement, but also trying to have a better proportion of points going to growth, embedding things like school-specific measures or mission, of ways to measure whether or not somebody was achieving their mission. And for that reason, because I believe there is always going to be a report card of some kind for charters, because we talk about accountability in exchange for autonomy, or autonomy in exchange for accountability. There aren't many ways to do that. And so in my view, which may not be the view of all charters, I do think that Aspire is an advance on the old PMF, because never before have we been able to say it's important to us that our students contribute actively to their community. That's in Friendship's mission. That is now measured on Aspire by my students doing student service learning, by me tracking it, and by my students doing community work. And so I do think that that's important. But yes, does Aspire still emphasize test scores? Absolutely. I don't know that there are any better systems across the country in how you would do that. Does Aspire have growth? Yes, it does. And we as charters wanted that. Does it have enough for the high school? It absolutely does not. MGP, which is a key growth measure, a median growth percentile, is not reported under PART for high schools. And so we don't have that. But ultimately, I think that you are going to find that Aspire will become how schools are measured. It already is happening. If you look at the transitional goals, even though Aspire is not published for the last 2 years, a pathway for schools to meet their goals, if they're on the lower performing, so that would be a level 4 or a level 5, is to improve within that level. The charter board knows the calculation. The schools should have their calculations by now, or at least they'll have them in the next couple of months. And so you can see whether or not you did improve, even if the public doesn't have that information.
And I just want to give a specific example on the growth issue for high schools. I don't want to totally mess up this number, but we have a particular single site high school in the city that they get their students from, I think, 42 different elementary schools across the city. That makes it very hard to growth is important when you have that many different kind of different sorts of students coming into one school. And when that's not calculated in a way that makes sense, they don't get any of the credit or any of the kind of benefits for all the work they're doing to get those students on track and bring them into a singular culture, advance them the way they're supposed to. And that particular school might find themselves in a little bit of trouble when they're one of our best. So I just want to name that as an example of where things get tricky if we don't think about how growth is valued for that particular population of students.
Let me also add that unlike the PMF, which looked at all the metrics for the entire student body for all students, Aspire is looking at, I think it's 5 different subgroups. So imagine that under the PMF, you may have had 20 measures that you had to verify, vet, collect data for. Under Aspire, It's 60 plus for friendship. It's thousands of records for 60 different metrics. That makes it more complicated. And so if one of the challenges that we've heard schools raise, we've raised it at Friendship, is data capacity within the PCSB, it has now gotten much more complicated. And so if you hear Aspire becoming an issue, it will be because we may get to the table and disagree on some of the accuracy behind data points. And now it is much more complicated. And that's why my call for more time is to make sure schools have time between when they get a preliminary report, non-public report, in order to vet all of the information that may be in that report.
Mr. Chairman, may I
Yes.
add something?
Yes, Mr. Roush.
Thank you. Because we do have some understanding of the intents and purposes of Aspire. And I agree with testimony that's been provided before. From our lens, in looking at performance frameworks from different authorizers across the country, Aspire is an important advance in terms of understanding school quality more holistically. As was already testified to, the addition of how well students are growing, the addition of mission-specific goals are really important innovations in performance frameworks that we're pleased to see in Aspire. Certainly, with any new performance framework, change management is complicated. When you go from something, especially something that's been around for a long period of time, to something that's new, it can create some challenges. And some of the challenges that have been raised are important to attend to. We also do think that one of the intents and purposes of Aspire is to make sure that we are having expectations for schools that are appropriate for what students need to be able to do next. And in a whole lot of places across the country, our definition of proficiency, our definition of growth has been woefully, I'll just say directly, it's been terrible, because we have kids who are achieving levels that we think are preparing them for what's next, but in fact, it is not. And so attempts to increase our ability to make sure kids are ready for what's next is vitally important across the country in a more holistic way, which we think Aspire does, and making sure that all kids are achieving at high levels becomes really important. And so the degree to which there are more groups of kids that we're looking at, it creates some more complexity, no doubt, and there needs to be some innovations to streamline those things, as some previous testimony has indicated. But we do think it is an important advance to something that can get us better to making sure that schools are preparing kids for whatever comes next.
Thank you. We've been joined by Councilmember Parker. Do you have any questions?
I do, but if you have more, feel free.
No, I've exhausted myself.
Okay. I've been fascinated by the conversation. I was actually going back to review your testimony, Ms. Brantley, but I wanted to come to this discussion of conditions and making sure there's consistency across schools. And it sounded like, from what you all were sharing, there's been improvement there, but there's still work to be done. And I guess my question is, that is the nature of the board, I'm imagining, or how could we better improve the consistency, even though there's been progress in that respect?
Hi, Councilmember. How are you?
Hi, good to see you.
Good to see you. I think there are a couple different ways we can think about this, right? So again, making sure that schools understand from the outset what conditions are available to them, and making sure there's a understanding between not just the schools, but the school, the staff, and the board. There is sometimes inconsistency even amongst those three different groups: PCSB staff, PCSB board, and the school.
And I think we saw that, not to jump in, sorry, we saw that with one of these recent closures where I think the staff said, let's keep the school open, and the board voted to close it.
Eagle, yeah.
Eagle, yeah.
And so when schools understand what conditions are available for what sorts of challenges they might have, and I think Pat was saying this earlier, typically there aren't conditions for things that are not, major issues. And if we know early enough, some of those issues can be solved for before we even get to the point of having to have conditions. If we're focusing on academics for the fall, or like moving that timeline earlier, and then checking in the spring to ensure that if there is an enrollment drop or there's a financial issue, we're doing that early enough, we won't even get to the point in a review where we have to add those conditions because we've already started fixing that problem long before we're in the process of formal review. If we're getting those updates regularly every year, the way we're supposed to, even if it's just a simple, you're on track financially, you're on track or maybe not on track academically, we gotta fix some things, and you're fine governance-wise. If we're getting that consistently, we wouldn't have to talk about conditions in this way. But if we do, then make sure schools are clear what that looks like from the outset. So they're not trying to scramble to figure out, is this my condition or will I get this? Because this school over here got X and we got Y and we don't know, we don't understand the difference.
Understood. Yeah. That makes perfect sense. And I'm going to use the remainder of my time, and I'm happy to yield some time back, about board training, but also board knowledge of what's going on. What we saw in a lot of these instances is that board members, and sometimes are just for show, or they're there showing up at meetings, but aren't really in the weeds of the financials or the academics. How can PCSB do a better job of ensuring that all board members are taking ownership of being the holder of the charter of the school versus these singular figures, whether it's the executive director or the founder?
I'm going to turn that back on you because you actually solved some of this problem for us with a board bill earlier this year. So thank you for that. And we're starting to implement that now, right? And it is a partnership between, thank you to council, but also PCSB and other organizations around the city, the DC Alliance included, to ensure that we are training board members and really helping them understand this is a shift for some folks who board members, and we talked about this in the hearing around that bill. Most of the board members, they're not trying to be there for show. They want to do good work at a school. Yeah, you know this. You right.
Yes.
But it's not a traditional nonprofit. It's not like joining the board of the DC Alliance, where I really don't even want you in my financial.
So I'm going to give an example, and I'm going to try not to say too much, but there may or may not be a school that was flagged for potential financial issues.
Sure.
The board is meeting regularly. However, the board members are not interfacing with PCSB. The PCSB is interfacing with the school leader.
Right.
And board members are not always privy to those discussions, and or their concerns may not necessarily be reflected on the record. Ms. Brantley, I don't know if you want to jump in here. I guess what I'm getting at is, how can we strengthen the connection between board members and the review process?
Before she jumps, I'm just going to say that is happening, and I know there's work to be done there. When those effective organizational meetings happen, board members should be engaging and participating, and also there should be conversations happening regularly that PCSB is checking on minutes, looking to ensure that as regular board meetings are happening, school board meetings are happening, they're reflecting on those minutes and having those conversations.
And maybe it's not practical, but do you think the board or someone in the entity should be checking in with individual board members to say, are there things?
I do think that is happening. I don't think it's happening as regularly as what you're suggesting.
Got it.
Yeah.
The primary cadence of PCSB board to board members is typically review process or school already in trouble. And so I appreciate the board bill, although I don't believe that training is going to be the lever that gets us to the kind of stability and quality that we want. It is a step. Every year, the charter board should send to the board of a charter school, this is where you stand. Otherwise,
Yes.
we're leaving it for executives to interpret things that we've gotten to the board. And it doesn't show up as cleanly in board minutes. You don't see a board minute that says, I reported to the board that we are in trouble. You will see the actions taken potentially. You will see some of a summary of the discussion, but it won't say that. I do believe that the charter board has gotten better with that because there are now reports, they are dense, that are going to boards. I think it can be improved by saying, here are 20 pages of data. your school is meeting the goals as of this year, or your school is not meeting the goals. And that would be academic. But also boards could be flagged if there are significant financial or operational, the legal compliance that would put a school, unfortunately, on track for revocation, because those other two things in operations and compliance or finance, if it's really a lack of viability, would do so.
And I have to just say, again, all your questions are well taken, and you're absolutely correct. And there's certainly, again, work to be done. And I think, correct, that it is not going to be a training issue, but I get to talk to board chairs pretty often, and there are certainly schools that need some improvement. By and large, though, we have a good, board members and board chairs a little bit different. We have a good set of board chairs who are really trying to understand the process and be engaged. Some of them have been before this body before and have engaged in testimony. So would love to just maybe even have those folks come and share their experience. And there's a bit of there's some education that could be done to make sure that board members also understand how to engage this process so that you all know what they're doing and how they're engaging. Because there are some really strong folks who are, giving up their time for free. This is it's a big job to have when you are not paid for it, when you are the holder of the charter.
Understood. Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, for the sake of time, I'm going to yield back the remainder of my time.
Thank you. I have no further questions for you all. Mr. Roush, thank you for participating, because I think you're in Arizona right now.
Houston, actually, at my annual conference.
That's what I said, in Houston.
Yes,
So
sir.
thank you
Thank
for
you,
your
sir.
time. Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Thank you, Ms. Brantley. I'm going to turn now to the other witnesses. We're not going to spend as much time with them, but don't take that personally. Janine Gomez, Executive Director, Co-founder, iDream Public Charter School. Salim Adolfo, who is a ANC Commissioner, maybe Chair of ANC 8C. Danielle Robinette, who's Senior Policy Attorney at the Children's Law Center. Laura Fuchs, President of the Washington Teachers Union. Onari Jackson, Community Outreach Manager at Friendship Public Charter School. Marjorie Yeager, Managing Partner with Education Forward DC. Jessica Sutter, listed as a public witness. Scott Goldstein, Executive Director of Empower Ed. And Tracy White, who's CEO of Paul Public Charter School. Okay, let's start with Ms. Gomez, and good morning.
Good morning. So I'm Janine Gomez, Executive Director and co-founder of iDream Public Charter School, serving preschool to fifth grades in Southeast DC. For 17 years, I've served this city as a charter school leader, design consultant, and founder. I appreciate the opportunity to share my experience with the charter school review and renewal process and its impact on our children, families, and educators. As I wrote to Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember Felder in May, the actions and conditions imposed by the DC Public Charter School Board left us with one painful but necessary conclusion. Closing our doors was the only responsible choice. We opened iDream PCS in August 2020, right in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. Because data weren't collected during the pandemic, the PCSB's 5-year review this spring relied on only 2 years of data for our brand new school. Our students showed academic growth in the 2 years. On the spring 2024 MAP growth assessments, 57% of students met their reading growth goals, a 20% increase from the year before, and 50% met math growth goals, a 28% increase. We also remained financially stable for all 5 years of operation. I expected a fair review with reasonable conditions and the opportunity to continue improving given the limited data. Instead, during our meeting with PCSB staff on March 17th, we were given 3 months to meet a pathway of the revised Aspire-aligned charter goals policy. Every expert I consulted confirmed that was impossible. Accepting the condition would have set our students, families, and staff up for failure. Who would send their children to a school at risk of closing? Who would work there? So my board and I made the hard decision to close iDream PCS. It was heartbreaking, but it was also an act of integrity and care. We chose stability for our families over uncertainty and dignity for our staff over impossible demands. The days that followed were full of grief. Our children, parents, and staff asked, where will we find another school like this? Because the lottery closed before we were informed of the renewal condition, many families faced long wait lists. The stress of that process and the loss of iDream were deeply felt across our community. We created a place where children were known, loved, and inspired to dream. And even in closing, we remained true to our mission, choosing what was right over what was easy. Today, I urge the DC Council and the PCSB to ensure no other school faces the same experience. Conduct 5-year reviews with 5 full years of data. Assign experienced staff to partner with schools a year before renewal. Make accountability a process of partnership, not punishment. If our shared goal is to serve children, then we must build systems that lift schools up, not close them down. Thank you for your time and for your commitment to DC's children.
Thank you, Ms. Gomez.
You're
I
welcome.
don't have a copy of your statement. Can you provide that,
Absolutely.
please? And what's your enrollment?
Our enrollment right now,
Yeah, or at the beginning of this year?
we closed in June.
Then last year.
Oh, last year we were enrolled at 99. We had 99 learners.
Thank you. Ms. Robinette.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson, Councilmember Parker, and staff. My name is Danielle Robinette. I'm a senior policy attorney at Children's Law Center. There's no easy answer to the question of whether and when to close a struggling school. However, there are procedural tools that the PCSB can implement to minimize the negative impact of school closures on DC students and families. Since last year's hearing on Eagle Academy, we have seen 2 more schools relinquish their charters. These more recent closures provided earlier notice to families, but were still announced after the My School DC lottery deadline. As such, displaced students were left with few choices and long wait lists for the next school year. To minimize the harm of school closures, PCSB should adjust their charter review timeline so that decisions can be made prior to the annual lottery deadline. Beyond the 5-year charter reviews, the board has several tools to evaluate charter schools' academic outcomes, fiscal health, and compliance with applicable law and policy. However, their enforcement power is drawn largely from their ability to revoke a school's charter. We encourage PCSB to find ways to leverage their oversight authority to ensure timely and actionable responses to concerns. The board's current practices do not drive meaningful change and have instead led to voluntary charter relinquishment and school closures. This time last year, PCSB issued a notice of concern to the Seed School of Washington for failing to adhere to federal and local special education compliance regulations. In the spring, PCSB conducted a qualitative site review of Seed, which indicated, quote, persistent, ineffective systems regarding routine functions and communications, and found, quote, concerning evidence related to the school's capacity to meet the programmatic standards in its charter agreement. At a public meeting in June, the board voted to maintain the notice of concern for Seed and conduct an out-of-cycle review in SY 25-26, which we understand is presently ongoing. While we appreciate the board's recent action, we are concerned about the timeliness of their oversight. The original community complaint was filed in October of 2022. Now, 3 years later, it is not clear what, if anything, has improved at Seed. These ongoing concerns demonstrate the limits of PCSB's current oversight practices to meaningfully improve struggling schools. Even when the board is aware of concerns, their oversight is slow, leaving students and families in limbo. When faced with persistent concerns, the primary enforcement tool available to PCSB is charter revocation. The board may revoke a charter where the school has violated applicable law or the conditions of their charter, and shall revoke where the school has engaged in a pattern of fiscal mismanagement or is no longer economically viable. But revocation is a drastic choice. Closing Seed would displace more than 200 students who reside on campus from Sunday evening through Friday afternoon. If PCSB's oversight cannot inspire meaningful improvements at Seed, the board will be left with the unenviable decision of whether to allow a struggling school to remain open or to revoke the charter and displace 200+ students from a residential program. Ultimately, the current system of charter oversight does not adequately protect students from abrupt school closures. We urge PCSB to develop and implement oversight interventions that lead to meaningful change. Moreover, where oversight is not able to prevent school closures, PCSB must have guidelines for the responsible wind down of a school when its charter has been revoked or relinquished. Thank you for this opportunity. I welcome any questions.
Thank you. Ms. Robinette, I don't have a copy of your statement either. And great, and I'm going to pause before we go to the virtual, in part because Ms. Gomez, I understand you have to leave. I had a couple questions for you. The meeting that you or your folks had with the PCSB staff on March 17th, and it was with the PCSB staff on March 17th of this year. I'm looking at a letter that I'm reading here. The severity of the recommended conditions was a surprise. Can you say more?
Yes, I can. So leading up to that meeting with all the work that I was doing with some people that were supporting me to look at data, we were still looking at the transitional goals that we had been held to in the previous years. And it wasn't clear that those transitional goals had changed in June of this year, so of last year. So when we were looking at and we were looking at our growth, did we grow on those metrics? We had grown, but growth was taken out when we met for that organizational effectiveness meeting. The transitional goals that the charter board or staff were referring to did not include growth. You had to meet the targets of the new Aspire pathways.
So the targets of Aspire was new and a surprise, and the growth, which had been a metric, was abandoned.
Yes,
And so then the conditions were that you had to meet the Aspire goals by, well, in 3 months.
yes. And I actually asked to be very clear, are you asking us to meet those goals by June 2025, which is 3 months from now? And it was confirmed that that was accurate.
And then you made the argument that iDream PCS is small with less than 10 students in every subgroup, and that fell on deaf ears?
Well, we didn't talk about it in that meeting. That was after, when I had the 7 days to look at that condition to see if we could actually meet it. That's when I really dug deeper into Aspire and what the expectations were. And yeah, that's where I learned that our school is 96% African American, and the subgroups that are also being looked at in Aspire, like we have less than 10 students in any of those subgroups. So while some of them were actually high achieving, their scores did not count because their subgroup was less than 10.
Well, so the way I'm taking it is that because your subgroups were so small, it really was sort of unfair to look at the past year because it just doesn't calculate for Aspire.
Yes.
But I'm wondering now if maybe also it was that the subgroups are so small, so there would be no way that you could prove in 3 months that you did meet Aspire.
That's correct too.
Ms. Robinette, I don't have a copy of your statement. I said that already. So I'm going to ask you to go over briefly SEED again. So the complaint about SEED came up in October of 2022.
Yeah, so the documents that are attached to the original notice of concern on the PCSB's website show that they received an initial complaint about SEED in October of 2022.
Now, you brought this up in the context of timeliness. So PCSB's done nothing? No, they've done something. So why is timeliness an issue here?
So the Our understanding from the documents that are public is that the original complaint was in October of 2022, and the board didn't vote to issue a notice of concern to SEED until October of 2024. It's not clear what was going on in the interim there. I urge you to ask the PCSB what actions they took before that. Then, following the issuance of the notice of concern in October of 24, they conducted a qualitative site review in the spring of 25. So those documents are also available on PCSB's website. They visited the school 5 or 6 times and found really deeply concerning issues with their implementation of special education. There were 4 requirements in the notice of concern. They met 3 of the 4. There was a data problem, but perhaps exemplary of kind of the issues we see with the oversight tools that they are using currently is that they met 3 of the 4 requirements in their notice of concern, including participating in the site review, but it wasn't, the lifting of the concern was not reliant upon the outcome of that qualitative site review, just their participation in it. So the fact that they participated and had basic, at like the scoring level is basic, in most categories, didn't act like they still met the requirement because they participated in it. Ultimately, the board voted to continue that notice of concern because they hadn't met the 4th condition, but had they had their data squared away with OSSI correctly, they would have technically met all 4 conditions of their notice of concern despite the really, really concerning provision of SPED.
I'm going to leave it at that. Councilmember Parker, do you have any questions?
Yes, Ms. Gomez, you said that the board gave unrealistic goals to attain within a 3-month period. What were the goals that you had to meet?
Well, there are 4 pathways. We had to meet one of the 4 pathways that was outlined in the new charter goals policy.
And those pathways included what?
So there are transitional goals that you had to meet. Those were I don't even remember. I'll have to.
I'm assuming re-enrollment, academic,
attendance,
financial.
Yeah, chronic absenteeism, which was, used to be truancy, changed to chronic absenteeism. Yeah, you had to meet.
And as I'm reviewing this document I just found online, it seemed like the charter board stated that the school didn't meet any of the 4 pathway goals.
No.
But it seems like you're challenging that assertion.
No, I'm not challenging that. I'm challenging that those goals were presented to us in that meeting.
I see.
Yeah.
And you didn't
We had
have enough
3
time
months
to
to
turn
meet.
things around.
Right. We had 3 months to meet. Yeah, we had to meet one of those pathways by June 2025.
And so before that meeting where you were given 3 months to turn things around, had there been any discussion about performance or your review process?
We received some mid-year data in February, but it wasn't the same. We weren't given that same document and the same, anything around that data. So what we had was what we thought we were supposed to meet.
Okay. One more question here. It's my understanding, and I don't know if this is still the case with Aspire, that schools get to set their own benchmarks as it relates to data. Like, I want to use MAP as a data source for my school to be held accountable. Is that still the case with Aspire? Or
Yeah, I'm not sure.
is that the case with your school?
We had adopted the PMF when we opened the school in 2020, and that's what we had used. So we weren't in the position at that time to look at. We had just started looking at Aspire to see where we are. We received that simulation to see where we were supposed to be, but we were using the PMF.
I got it.
Mhm.
Okay. This is helpful, and I'm going to yield back time. I just would say, looking at this review, one line struck me. In school year 23-24, iDream PCS says ELA and math proficiency rates were both less than 5%.
On the CAPE, on the DC
That's
CAPE.
staggering. That means 95% of the students were not proficient.
Yeah, and you're talking about 18 students. Yes, that's correct. But in terms of growth, students were growing. We started in the pandemic and again, we have 70% of our students identified at risk. Our learners were coming from a long way.
And growth is important.
they're
I
growing.
just would name,
Right.
and I hate to be this person, I think it's completely fair to critique process. But if I look at these rates and the promise of the charter sector, I would say the school wasn't meeting the intended goals, which was to accelerate performance and provide a quality education, regardless of where the student started from.
Right, and with 2 years of data, that's absolutely true. Coming from the pandemic with 2 years of data, yes. And that was a concern for us too. We were really putting a lot of focus on literacy, growth and development and achievement, like that was it, but that takes time. It
Understood.
takes time.
Understood. Well, thank you all for
Yeah,
your
you're
testimony.
welcome.
Thank you, each of you. Please give us copies of your statements, and you guys are excused, and I'll turn to the virtual folks. Salim Adolfo was not here earlier. I assume he still isn't. Laura Fuchs. Anari Jackson is online. You're up.
Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and council members. My name is Onari Jackson, and I serve as the Community Outreach Manager for Friendship Public Charter School. I come before you not only in that role, but as someone who has witnessed firsthand how decisions of our education system ripple through lives in real time, students, families, teachers, and entire community. I am also the daughter of Cassandra S. Pinckney, a founding leader in the DC's charter school movement, whose lifelong commitment to equity, dignity, and opportunity continue to guide me. Her work reminds me daily that education is not just about instruction, but it is about hope, stability, and the promise of a future. I'm here today to speak about the charter renewal and closure process, a process that, while administrative on paper, carries profound human consequence in reality. Accountability is essential, but in the manner in which it is exercised defines its impact. It is not about pointing fingers. It is not about the task of one person or the blame game. This is about shared responsibility, a call to supporting one another, and above all, to protecting the people most affected by the decisions. When the process lacks transparency, when decisions are delayed and communicated inconsistently, the effects are deeply personal and often devastating. I have seen firsthand the emotional scars that ripple across neighborhoods. Families are left with questions they cannot answer. Educators are blindsided. Students, our children, lose stability and the sense of safety. These are not abstract consequences. Transparency is not just about sharing data. It is about honoring the dignity for everyone affected. Families deserve early, honest, and continuous communication. Staff deserves acknowledgement and clarity about their futures. Students deserve to focus on learning without anxiety and uncertainty. Without transparency, trust erodes. A timely, fair, and open renewal process does more to prevent chaos, and it will restore faith. It ensures families, students, and staff feel seen, heard, and valued. It allows schools to improve while placing well-being of the community at the heart of its decisions. I urge this council to continue to support the Public Charter School Board as they review and revise the renewal process so that it becomes clear, timely, and participatory. This process should embody our values of equity, accountability, compassion, and collective responsibility. When executed with care, it strengthens communities, empowers students, and honors responsibilities and decisions with educators. We have an opportunity to create a system where accountability and empathy coexist, where data and dignity are intertwined, where every family, student, and teacher knows that they are not invisible and not forgotten, and their voices matter. This is our chance together to ensure that no school, no family, and no child in DC is left in uncertainty. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Jackson. I do have a copy of your statement, so thank you. Marjorie Yeager?
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you so much. Good morning to Mr. Chairman and the members of the Council of the District of Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity for being able to speak with you today. My name is Margie Ager, and in addition to being a Ward 3 resident and the parent of 3 public school students, including 2 in charters, I'm the managing partner of Education for DC and a member of a DC Public Charter School Board. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today on the charter review process for public charter schools in DC. The Public Charter School Board's charter review and renewal process is the core responsibility of PCSB. Public charter school autonomy coupled with strong accountability from an independent authorizer are pillars of the education progress the district has experienced over the past 2 decades, and the consequences of how this process ripple through our entire education system. The stakes of this process are incredibly high, not only for the leaders and educators whose work is on the line, but especially for the public school students in DC who deserve access to high-quality education that prepares them to thrive. We need a process that is transparent, as other panelists have noted. Families, educators, and school leaders should understand the criteria for renewal decisions and have confidence that those standards are applied consistently and fairly with clear and accurate data. We need a process that's predictable and realistic. Schools should know what is expected of them well in advance and should be provided regular updates on progress towards charter goals, allowing leaders adequate time to course correct, improve, and make well-informed decisions about the future of their school. This could prevent last-minute and hasty closure decisions. We also need timely decisions, as has been discussed in this hearing. Decisions on renewal should be made early enough to allow students and families time to meaningfully explore their options and participate in the My School DC process. Late decisions force families into rushed, high-stakes choices without adequate time for school visits, information gathering, or thoughtful consideration. Additionally, schools best suited to meet a student's needs may have reached capacity with extensive wait lists. We would also encourage the council to consider offering a closing school preference to students who are impacted by school closures so that they could be prioritized as they're experiencing an educational disruption. Despite the challenges that have occurred, we appreciate PCSB's reflection and commitment to some changes moving forward, which include starting the review process earlier in the year, ensuring that any potential school closure decisions occur before the lottery closes, providing earlier communication to schools and boards regarding probable outcomes, while extending the timeframe for schools to review and submit feedback on the draft report, and giving schools an opportunity to provide a response that will be published with their review report to share a fuller picture of the school's story over the past 5 years. We believe these changes will strengthen the charter school's review process and appreciate that LEA leader feedback is being incorporated. We're also looking forward to the upcoming school mergers policy, which PCSB currently has under review, as an added tool to be able to preserve school communities, retain experienced educators, and provide continuity for students while addressing performance concerns. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Ms. Yeager. Jessica Sutter.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chairman Mendelson and members of the council. My name is Dr. Jessica Sutter. I'm a resident of Ward 5 and a board member at Washington U. Ying Public Charter School. I'm also proudly president of EdPro Consulting, an organization supporting public schools and education organizations around the country. Much of my work has focused on supporting the public charter school sector. I'm also joining you today from Houston, Texas, where I'm also at the NACSA conference. Authorizers play a critical role in charter school accountability, reviewing and renewing schools and sometimes making difficult decisions to close schools which fail to meet expectations of their charter. I say this because school closure is an expected possibility for charter schools when they face reviews and renewals. It's a feature, not a bug in the charter school model. That said, there are several premises at the core of all decisions about charter school reviews, renewals, and closure decisions, many of which you've heard from other panelists already today. All decisions should be timely. There should be few surprises. Transparent data and clear communication is essential. When closures do happen, there must be respect and care for students and families affected by the closure. I have particular expertise in the work of charter closures in DC. From 2013 to 2016, I supported PCSB as a consultant on charter school closures. I also wrote my dissertation on that process. Timing was key to all of the decisions made in the 8 closures I oversaw and wrote my dissertation on. More specifically, timing which allowed schools, families, and students adequate time to make plans for what they would do when their school was closed. One quote stands out from interviews I did with PCSB board and staff members at the time of that process. It refers to the timeline PCSB aspired to when they were conducting non-renewal and other closure decisions, especially in those where another operator might be able to serve the same students in mergers or acquisitions, as Margie just talked about. The quote is, I think the biggest barrier to successful restart is if the school's not closed until February, how the heck do you get something up and running, ready to go with staff and all by September? We try to make decisions by November or December, giving schools an extra month. Early timing about decisions on reviews and renewals is critical and possible. We've done it before. Clarity around how decisions are made is also critical. All members of the public must be easily able to educate themselves on where a charter school stands in relation to their charter agreement and goals. Others have been eloquent on data challenges and changes from PMF to Aspire, but we need a way for charter school board members and schools' families to quickly understand whether their child's school is up for review or renewal and how they're doing in that process. Finally, if and when closures happen, they need to do so in a way that respects the school, students, and families. Closures are painful, but they need not be traumatic if they're done in a timely manner, and if what comes next keeps care for students at the center of all actions. There are ways we can ease the pain of these processes. I'll offer two. If decisions are made too late for the My School DC lottery, the district can provide a longer runway for a school to close. Creating an emergency fund for a wind down year in these cases can allow students and families appropriate time to transition and fair access to the lottery. Finally, when school decisions are made to close or non-renew, students affected by the closure can be given a lottery preference, a golden ticket in the parlance of the New Orleans policy, to help them access higher performing schools in their next school year. I appreciate the chance to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Sutter. I do not have a copy of your statement, if you could provide that.
I will. Thank you.
Scott Goldstein.
Good morning. We appreciate the council following up on this topic to ensure that our response to acute crises like what happened at Eagle Academy last year are not fleeting, but we improve processes to make sure we avoid future harm. Schools are communities, and we should never want a community to be broken up. I've watched over the years as DC public charter schools go through this process. As has been described, it can be an intense process, but in the final stages of the process, as they have a group from the school often testify jointly at a PCSB monthly meeting, I have to say it can be inspiring. Hearing proud school leaders and proud educators describe all the things they do, going far beyond what's required to serve students and families, is always inspiring and brings about ideas for how to improve schools more broadly. I think this stage of the process offers a glimpse into what could be strengthened throughout the process. When they get to this stage, they present a full range of activities that make their schools unique, special, and strong. But I'm afraid when we look at the earlier indicators in the process, they're too narrow and, has been mentioned, not timely. The hearing notice of this council wants to examine things like academic performance, operational effectiveness, financial stability, and community impact. I encourage you to focus on indicators that are leading rather than lagging indicators. But I'm here as a teacher advocate because I believe the honest views of staff and indications of school culture are one of the most effective leading indicators. Research shows high staff turnover and low staff morale are strong indicators of mismanagement and instability. While I knew this research, when I looked at the most recent DC charter schools who have closed, I was astonished to see this data. From 21 to 22, Eagle Academy's larger campus had a 50% turnover rate. 22 of 44 educators left. The next school year, from 22-23 to 23-24, the other Eagle Academy campus had a 50% turnover rate. Hope Community PCS, which just closed, likewise experienced 52% turnover from 22 to 23, and then an astonishing 64% turnover from 23 to 24, with just 8 of 22 teachers staying on. iDream PCS had 45% turnover from 22 to 23, and then 73% turnover from 23 to 24, with 8 out of 11 educators leaving before the school year had closed. Danielle mentioned Seed Public Charter School, currently under scrutiny, which had a 44% turnover rate from 22 to 23 and 34% from 23 to 24. This isn't to say that any of these schools ended up closing or failing to meet review standards because of turnover, nor that turnover is in every case indicative of organizational failure. But teacher turnover is often being called the canary in the coal mine, and it is. When something's wrong organizationally, staff know it, and they are also unlikely to stay. In order to review charter school renewal applications, PCSB looks at indicators from the new Aspire system and the OSSE school report card, but those indicators are overwhelmingly based on student test scores, whether proficiency or growth or academic data, then looks at compliance with charter school and other relevant laws and fiscal management and economic viability, but those indicators will be lagging. In other words, you will see them once the problem is already present. A 2009 study from Helen Ladd at Duke University found that teacher perceptions of working environments strongly related to student test scores. Research from Kraft and Pape in 2014 at Brown University found strong staff satisfaction was an effective leading indicator of student academic growth. And there's other research in my full testimony. At the PCSB meeting last year, I testified in support of including measures of staff satisfaction and educator retention as part of Aspire, not as a small percentage of a school-selected goal, but a critical piece of the system. Other school leaders gave similar testimony, and you heard earlier, actually, from testimony from Pat Brantley, that there was a desire from many in the community and school leaders for us to have a more dramatic overhaul of what a school evaluation system would look like. For situations like what happened at Eagle Academy, we should ensure PSCSB has a reserve fund to make sure every student gets matched and enroll with a new school, and that no staff go unpaid while they search for a new job. Thanks for your attention to this subject and for valuing educator voice.
Thank you, Mr. Goldstein. And I have a copy of your statement. Tracy White, I think, is not here. Tracy White, you are up.
I am here. Good morning.
Morning.
Can you hear me? I can't hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please proceed.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Mendelson and members of the council. My name is Dr. Tracy White, and I serve as the proud CEO of Paul Public Charter Schools, which this year celebrates its 25th anniversary of educating and empowering young people in the District of Columbia. I first want to thank the council for examining the charter review and renewal process. We appreciate the DC Public Charter School Board's important role as an independent authorizer and its commitment to high standards that ensure accountability for every LEA in our city. Strong oversight, when clear and consistent, strengthens both schools and the families that we serve. Our team recently completed our 25-year charter review, and while we remain deeply grateful for the professionalism of the PCSB, excuse me, I'm losing my space. Oh, excuse me. My computer is glitching for a moment. Okay. I'm sorry. My computer.
Okay. That's why some of us believe in paper.
I know. I'm sorry. It's glitching. Please pardon me. I will open it up again. Okay. We appreciate the DC Public Charter Schools Board important role as an independent authorizer and its commitment to high standards that ensure accountability for every LEA in our city. Strong oversight, when clear and consistent, strengthens both schools and the families that we serve. Our team recently completed our 25-year review. And while we remain grateful for the professionalism of the PCSB staff members, we did experience some challenges that reveal that there are opportunities for process improvement. As I've shared with the PCSB before, the introduction of new evaluative language in the QSR narrative late in the process sometimes raised questions about consistency, clarity, and timing. We fully support, as all charters do, rigorous evaluation, but we also need transparency in how data are interpreted so we can make data-driven adjustments before final determinations are made. We recognize that the PCSB's work is very complex and demanding. Still, strong authorizers are most effective when the expectations are clear, and there is most assuredly some work that can be done relative to how clear expectations are. Strong authorizers are also most effective when communication is ongoing and schools understand how standards will be applied. And we would welcome a process that includes regular check-ins during the review cycle that allows schools to clarify data trends and respond to feedback earlier rather than later. Another area for reflection is around timing. The calendar of reviews and renewals directly affects families and staff planning, providing adequate lead time, and early communication supports student stability, helps families make informed enrollment choices, and preserves public trust in the charter sector, which is most important. In closing, Paul stands behind high standards in transparency and accountability. Our request is simple, that the process continue to evolve towards clarity, predictability, and collaboration, ensuring that schools can focus every ounce of our energy on what matters most, which is teaching, learning, and the success of the students that we serve. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. White. And if you could give us a copy of your statement, that would be great.
I most assuredly will. Thank you so much.
Thank
And
you.
I'll use paper next time.
Whatever makes you comfortable or uncomfortable. I just have, let me see, I have a question for somebody. A lot of what you all brought up is helpful because it reaffirms what we'd heard earlier in testimony. So I want to thank you for that. Um, I have a question. I have to go figure it out. Councilmember Parker, you want to go first?
Sure. And I don't have many questions, but Ms. White, you raised some themes that have come up before around the timeline of like the review process and frequent check-ins or ongoing communication. How often did you have to check in with the PCSB during your review process?
Well, in terms of like check-ins relative to data and those types of things, those weren't necessarily built into the review process. When the time came for our actual review, we received the data that would kind of drive the review and the decisions, and had about a week to respond to the data. That is difficult, right? You're talking about 5 years of data. The reports are very extensive. We are very fortunate, especially as a single site LEA, to actually have members of our staff that are adept at being able to go through the data with a fine-tooth comb and identify where there are errors. And as you can imagine, 5 years of data, there are errors. And so there aren't necessarily those check-ins along the way. That's not the experience for our LEA. And so when the review time comes, we definitely need more lead time to be able to comb through, and it would be helpful if there were more frequent check-ins. So if there are errors or explanations that are warranted or needed, we can give those before you get to the table where determinations and decisions have to happen.
That makes perfect sense to me. And that dovetails with what we heard from Ms. Gomez on the previous panel, that by time they received information, it felt like it was a last minute request or info sharing.
And you can imagine if your school is okay, then that's fine-ish. But if there are some concerns, then that is definitely challenging.
Understood. And I know you are on the school facing side, and shout out to Paul. In a former life, I used to support Paul. So I feel very much connected to your school community. But I know you're on the school facing side of things. Do you have insight to how the board engaged board members, like Paul, board members in the review process?
So our board members are engaged because they definitely join the meeting when we present our position to the full PCSB. In terms of engagement along the way, I can imagine that if there were concerns, I would imagine that the PCSB would make contact with them. But again, this is hypothetically speaking. Paul was in a position where there were not necessarily those concerns about continuance or our data, and so our board was not engaged beyond attending the meeting with us. Now, on the school side, our board is engaged in reviewing our data all the time, but I can't speak to that because of probably the position that our organization was in going into our review.
Understood. Thank you. And then I would just end by saying, Mr. Goldstein, those rates of teacher turnover are absolutely staggering. And so it's certainly something I'll bring up. And I agree with you. It may be an indicator that we should be looking at as an early warning sign for schools that need a little bit extra support. But thank you all for your testimony.
Thank you, Councilmember. I figured out the question I have. It's for you, Ms. Yeager. You had in your statement spoken positively. We're looking forward to the upcoming mergers and acquisitions policy. And it got me thinking, there was a statement I received before the hearing, not somebody who's testified, who was critical of I forget what EOM stands for, Executive Operation, no. At any rate, it was critical of the EOM on October 16th and said this: the casual discussion of mergers and acquisitions, language lifted straight from corporate boardrooms, not classrooms, exposed the board's real agenda instead of centering children and communities, the conversation centered control and consolidation. Hearing board leadership speak so cavalierly about mergers as though schools were disposable business units, not living communities of children, families, and educators was chilling. Very different perspective.
Sure. I don't think that any of these policies, whether it's closure or mergers, are things that should be taken lightly. They are very serious decisions that require careful engagement. I would say that I actually think that mergers can be a helpful tool in terms of preserving continuity in school communities, supporting educators, and supporting students. Again, they require extensive planning, engagement, and support. But there is a pathway where a school doesn't necessarily have to close, and there is an option for it to sort of retain some core elements, but with additional support from another LEA and sort of be rebirthed in a new way. We could certainly rename it something that's less corporate. I think that's just for clarity of, what's going on in terms of two schools joining together or one school taking over to provide support for another. But I actually think it can be a helpful tool to provide actually more stability than a closure process may be able to. So I would just offer a different perspective.
Well, that's what I asked. Thank you. I want to thank each of you for your testimony. Again, it's been very helpful. You all are excused. I'm going to turn to Chantel Wright, Chair of the Public Charter School Board, and Dr. Michelle Walker Davis, the Executive Director of the Public Charter School Board. Who's going first? Dr. Walker Davis, are you going first?
Yes, good afternoon.
Okay.
Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and members and staff of the Committee of the Whole. I am Dr. Michelle Walker Davis, Executive Director of the DC Public Charter School Board, or DCPCSB, the authorizer of public charter schools in the district. I'm grateful to be joined today by our board chair, Chantel Wright, and grateful for the opportunity to testify on our agency's review and renewal processes. I know, Chairman, that you prefer witnesses to testify in person, and I appreciate your indulgence today as we join remotely from the Leadership Conference, hosted by the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, or NACSA. As this committee knows, DCPCSB's authority is grounded in the School Reform Act, or SRA, a law enacted in 1996. The SRA sets the process for DCPCSB to grant charters and critically requires us to renew them every 15 years. The SRA also lays out the requirements for such renewals. First, a school must not have broken any laws or violated any terms and conditions of its charter. Second, a school must have met the goals and academic achievement expectations set forth in its charter. I want to emphasize here that the SRA does not grant us discretion on either point. If a public charter school violates the law or fails to meet its charter goals, DCPCSB cannot renew the school's charter. Think of the 15-year renewal as a pass-fail exam. 15 years between renewals is a long time, and in the interim, the SRA requires DCPCSB to review each public charter school at least once every 5 years to assess academic performance, charter and legal compliance, and financial health. Unlike the 15-year renewals, DCPCSB has some discretion with the 5-year reviews. If a school is doing well, our board can vote to continue the school with the expectation that it will continue to do well and improve. If a school is struggling to meet its commitments, the board can vote to continue the school with certain conditions or performance expectations. And in an extreme case, the board can vote to begin the charter revocation process. I also want to be clear that if DCPCSB sees evidence of financial mismanagement or potential insolvency, we will take immediate action outside of the standard review and renewal cycle, including beginning the charter revocation process if necessary. What are we looking at during these reviews and renewals? The simplest answer is that we measure a school against its own charter goals or the set of commitments the school made in return for autonomy. Many public charter schools adopted our previous academic accountability system, the PMF, as their charter goals. We're hopeful many will adopt Aspire, our current academic accountability system. As you have heard me say before, DCPCSB built Aspire over years of collaboration with school leaders, educators, families, and community members. Aspire centers growth, equity, and opportunity while giving the public a clear view of how schools are serving their students. It goes beyond a single test score, using multiple measures like student growth, achievement, attendance, and re-enrollment to provide a fuller picture of what's working well. When we begin publishing Aspire data next year, anybody with internet access can review how well public charter schools serve their students. In addition to the accountability measures embedded in Aspire, we also give schools the opportunity to adopt unique charter goals. This recognizes that Aspire may not be the best fit for every mission, student population, or operational model. This flexibility allows schools to work toward a goal that better aligns with their mission and their students. As I mentioned, the SRA gives DCPCSB some discretion during the 5-year reviews, including the ability to use conditions that help a school make progress toward its charter goals. But when a school continues to struggle to meet those goals, even after every effort has been made, the SRA also outlines the process the board must follow, which can include charter revocation. Chair Wright will speak more to this, but I want to say for the record, this is the hardest part of our job. Our agency is filled with former teachers and school leaders who understand firsthand what it takes to build and sustain a school community. We know that when a school closes, it's not just the end of an operation, it's the end of a dream, and it brings real pain to students, families, educators, and communities. The past few years have added even more complexity to this work. We're still feeling the pandemic's impacts, including having fewer than 5 years of available data. We've also seen 3 schools make the difficult decision to relinquish their charters over the past 2 years. One school, facing financial insolvency, made this decision outside of a formal review process, while 2 others did so during a review cycle. These were not easy moments for us as an authorizer, and I know they were even more challenging for students, families, and school leadership. In response, I asked DCPCSB staff to carefully examine our operations, timelines, and communications to identify opportunities for improvement. I'm pleased to share a few changes we've already implemented that will strengthen the process moving forward. First, we are engaging school leaders and board trustees earlier and more consistently, sharing information on major milestones and the types of conditions our staff may recommend for continuance. We are increasing our communication with schools through multiple channels: meetings, phone calls, emails, school visits, and written materials to provide clear guidance on the process, key context, and critical deadlines. This review cycle, we also lengthened the time frame for schools to meet conditions placed upon them, meaning no public charter school will be asked to achieve certain milestones within the same school year that conditions are placed. And in response to public concerns, including from this committee, we will begin our review cycle earlier with My School DC lottery deadlines in mind. We are working with the superintendent's office to review all relevant data and working with schools to validate well ahead of the 2026-2027 lottery deadlines, so families have information to support their enrollment decisions. Finally, I want to thank Councilmember Henderson for introducing the Board of Trustees Training Amendment Act and your committee's leadership in working with us to strengthen and pass this bill over the summer. DCPCSB supported the bill, which requires annual governance training for public charter school trustee members, because we know school boards play a vital role in identifying and addressing challenges early before they escalate. We are actively working to implement this law and have already started offering some training pilots to board members with full implementation starting next school year. These changes will strengthen our work and the charter sector by giving school leaders more time and transparency, and by giving public charter schools families more predictability and peace of mind. We also know there is more to do, and we are committed to working with you and our stakeholders to make our processes better for those whom we serve. I thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Wright.
My apologies. Is it still on? Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson, council members, staff, and members of the public. My name is Chantel Wright, and I serve as chair of the DC Public Charter School Board. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today on charter school reviews and renewals, and I echo Dr. Walker Davis's thanks for accommodating us both remotely. Let me start with the simple truth. The relationship between the DC Public Charter School Board and each school board is built on a commitment, a compact, a charter. It's a promise of greater autonomy in exchange for clear expectations of academic, financial, and operational success. The DC PCSB board takes that promise seriously. We evaluate each school's performance against its commitments and hold schools accountable, not to punish, but to ensure they deliver on the promise they made to their students and their families. As part of a review or renewal, DC PCSB staff evaluate whether a school has met its agreed upon charter goals. Staff review performance data, meet with school leaders, visit classrooms, examine student work, and carefully assess academic, financial, and compliance performance over the past 5 years. Based on that analysis, staff then make a recommendation to the DC PCSB board. For 5-year reviews, the staff recommendations to this board may be to continue the school without conditions, continue the school with conditions, or move to revoke the school's charter. It is very important to note, as Dr. Walker Davis shared, the School Reform Act does not grant the same discretion at a 15-year renewal. If the public charter school violates the law or fails to meet its charter goals at renewal, the DC PCSB cannot renew the school's charter. If anyone believes our role is to close schools unnecessarily, let me be clear, nothing could be further from the truth. My fellow board members and I are parents, DC residents, and civic leaders with years of experience in education. We are deeply invested in the success of every school, and our goal is to celebrate, support, and strengthen them, while ensuring every student has access to quality education they were promised and that they deserve. Speaking personally, I know what this conversation feels like from the other side of the table. I founded and led a public charter school network here in the district for years. I've been there, pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into building a school and realizing a dream for young scholars and their families. And I've also had the DC PCSB hold me and my team accountable for our outcomes, even issuing conditions for our continuance when we didn't meet the bar we set for ourselves and that we had agreed to with the board. So when I talk about accountability, I do so as someone who's lived it, who understands both the weight of leading a school and the responsibility of ensuring every student has access to a high-quality education. Let me be clear. No one opens up a school to fail. No one sets out to be the lowest performing school in the city. As much as we want every school to succeed, to keep its promise, history tells us that some will not. They just won't. So let me talk about what happens in that scenario. Coming out of a 5-year review, as I shared, the DC PCSB board can vote to continue a charter with time-bound conditions for improvement. I know there was a lot of talk about conditions earlier. I appreciate Kariga Rausch's presentation about conditions and how they play out across the country. But let me say a few words about conditions because I don't want folks to get the wrong impression. Conditions aren't new goals or added requirements. They're the same goals a school already has, made more specific and time-bound to ensure real progress towards meeting them. The board uses these tools only when a school has fallen significantly off track and only as a means of supporting improvement while maintaining accountability. I shared earlier how my own school was subject to conditions when we fell off track. In that same sense, conditions are an alternative to closure, a way for this board to signal both its concern about the performance and its continued belief in the school's potential to improve. They reflect our commitment to keeping schools open whenever possible, but not without clear time-bound conditions of improvement. Because not taking action when a school isn't meeting its goals would mean failing both our students and the promise of accountability we made to them. I appreciate again Mr. Roush's testimony to you clarifying the best practice for an authorizer's use of conditions. The last option coming out of a 5-year review when a school has not met its goals or satisfies conditions is revocation of the school's charter. So while those are DCPCSB board actions, schools can also choose to voluntarily relinquish their charter when their leaders determine they will be unable to meet their goals or fulfill conditions for continuance. I also want to be clear, a school can relinquish its charter even when it isn't under review. That is the right of a school and its board. During the most recent school year, 2 schools made that difficult decision. When a school board reaches that point, we stay closely engaged to manage the transition in a way that minimizes disruptions for students, families, and staff. Our commitment to students and communities does not end with relinquishment or revocation. We understand the uncertainty these moments create, and we work to provide as much stability as possible, helping families find their next school of choice and supporting effective staff as they transition following the school closure. Having outlined the DC PCSB board's role in reviews and renewals, I want to turn to the steps we've taken to strengthen our process. Drawing on our own reflections, we did reflect, as well as feedback we've received, including from this direct committee. You urged us to begin the review and renewal process earlier, and we heard you. We, as a board, pushed staff to start the review and renewal process earlier, and they've responded. This year, we've moved the process forward by 3 months to minimize disruption for families and schools and to ensure the most critical decisions are made before the lottery closes. You asked for greater clarity on our timelines and the steps involved in renewals and reviews. In response, we've improved our communications and strengthened our engagement with school leaders. It happens earlier, and it includes their boards to make each phase of the process more transparent and predictable. You asked us to strengthen how we communicate difficult feedback to school leaders, and we agree. Dr. Walker Davis and I have had several conversations about ensuring those interactions are marked by respect, empathy, and professionalism. That doesn't mean that they will like it, as you heard Dr. Roush say earlier, but we do work to make sure that that happens. Before I close, I want to highlight one final effort, our work to create alternatives to closure for low-performing schools. At the direct request of charter school leaders and the sector partners, DCPCSB is developing a formal policy to guide how the board considers requests from schools to combine or restructure in ways that strengthen their programs. Working in collaboration with these leaders, we're establishing clear, predictable guidelines that promote transparency for the school leaders, for the staff, but most importantly, for families and students. We welcome the committee's feedback when the public comment period opens on October 27th at our monthly board meeting. I hope my testimony has helped to clarify the DCPCSB board's role in charter reviews and renewals and to pull back the curtain on our decisions, expectations, and the responsibilities that come with this work. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Wright, 10 minutes. Your testimony is positive, but, and I'm thinking of what you just said, Ms. Wright, but also the testimony from Dr. Walker Davis. We've also lengthened the time frame for schools to meet conditions, meaning no public charter school will be asked to achieve certain milestones within the same school year. But the testimony from iDream They met on March 17th with PCBSB staff. The severity of the recommended conditions was a surprise and were conditions that they were unable to meet. So can you reconcile that?
Yeah, so well, first I just want to acknowledge again, as a fellow school founder, I understand Ms. Gomez's pain and I relate to it. Again, as I said, no one opens up a school to fail. No one wants to have to sit in front of city council and be asked about the
Right,
proficiency.
now, don't use up all my time here.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Reconcile those two.
So last year, we did indeed issue conditions that schools had to meet by the end of the 24-25 school year. We wanted to see a level of performance that indicated that the school was on track to continue and to improve by the end of the school year. We have pulled back on that, and going forward, we will not be recommending same year conditions, meaning that we tell you that by the end of this school year that we're currently in, you have to meet a certain condition. That does not change your responsibility for your performance throughout the school year, but it will not be a condition to continuance.
Okay, so Dr. Walker Davis's statement is a statement of a perspective. Is that correct, Dr. Walker Davis?
What statement are you referring to, Chairman?
The one I was just asking about.
About the conditions?
That there would be no conditions imposed. We also lengthened the time frame for schools to meet conditions placed upon them, meaning no public charter school will be asked to achieve certain milestones within the same school year. So that's going forward, not reflecting on the past year.
Correct. That is beginning this review cycle, if we are in the position of having to issue conditions, it would not be for the school year that the school is currently in.
As a minor point, in your testimony, Dr. Walker Davis, you noted that the School Reform Act does not grant discretion on either point if a public charter school violates the law or fails to meet its charter goals. You cannot renew the school's charter. Has any school been non-renewed for violating the law?
Thank you, Chairman. I would have to go back and look at historically actions of PCSB, but since my tenure, that has not been the case.
Okay, I didn't think so. One of the issues that iDream raised was that Aspire uses a point system with weighted subgroups, but there must be 10 or more students in each subgroup. iDream was small, 99 was the enrollment, and they had less than 10 students in every subgroup. So then how can Aspire be used in that case?
Thank you for the question. I would say, there are rules for data collection and reporting that are not specific to iDream, and they usually involve N sizes. And so I appreciate Ms. Gomez's perspective around the data for her population. And those data rules are designed not to be punitive to schools. Usually it's to protect student information and also to shelter schools from deep swings in performance. So we follow business rules typical of data collection. OSSI does the same. And so that is why those data were suppressed for that particular school community.
I'm confused by your answer. So if Aspire requires a subgroup of more than 10 students and all their subgroups are under 10 students, you're saying you're still able to evaluate them per Aspire?
There are multiple measures on Aspire that would allow us to evaluate a school. If there is a metric that has fewer than 10 students, we may not include that metric, but there are other metrics in the Aspire system. I do actually want to take this point of time to talk about the conditions, and because I think that there's been some misrepresentation of what the expectations were for schools that received conditions. PCSB did not issue any new expectations on schools for the review cycle last year. As has been said, during the pandemic, we issued a number of opportunities for schools to meet their goals. Those multiple, what we call pathways, were known as early as 2021 and then updated again in 2023. And so at the time that PCSB did issue conditions on the school. They were expectations that were already laid out for performance for school year 24-25. Now, I understand that if you're in that school year and you are hearing that your continuance is subject to the performance of that school year, it feels new, and I understand that frustration. However, we were very thoughtful not to put different expectations on those schools, but to reiterate the expectations that were already set, not just for the schools under review, but for all of our schools during
Okay,
that.
so sorry to interrupt. I have 4 minutes left. There was a lot of testimony about timeline, transparency. I'm looking at Mr. Rausch's testimony. At least annually produces a report on each school's performance. And it would appear that that's not been happening.
Yes, I appreciate
There's a
your
question there.
Yes, I appreciate the question. I was following you earlier. And it is true, PCSB has not been doing the typical annual reporting that happened pre-pandemic. First, as was pointed out by Ms. Johnson, we did not have data available to us for 2 school years to publicly report, and that was the same as our state. Secondly, as we were transitioning into our new accountability system, it was important to us and also important to our schools that we did not publish data for a system that was not fully live yet. And so while we were able to provide information to our schools about their performance, it was at their request and also good practice not to publish data for an accountability system that was
But I don't,
piloted.
forgive me for interrupting, but I don't know that I'm talking about necessarily publishing data.
Mhm.
The statement from Mr. Rausch was an annual report to the school.
The
So-
schools did receive annual reports of their data, but I would agree with Ms. Brantley and other school leaders that we could make that information much clearer for schools, and we've taken action to do so to help them not the school leaders and their boards to receive the information, but to make meaning of that information. We continued, even during the pandemic, to publish our mid-year reports that said, here's how you're performing academically, here's how you're performing in terms of compliance, and we have ongoing financial monitoring. What I think was not clear for schools, and which we've done a better job of now, is just communicating, and this is what those data mean.
And this is what those data mean, which is like kind of like I want to say summative, but I think that's not the right
Correct.
word. A summary, a more subjective conclusion of what the
Correct.
data means. And you're saying going forward, you will be doing that.
Yes.
And that the PCSB was doing that before the pandemic.
Yes, and it was easier to do that before the pandemic because we had our performance management framework. It was calculated consistently over time, and we were able to say you are at this particular tier or on our performance management framework. In the absence of being able to have that consistent data, we did have transitional goals. We did have multiple pathways, and I believe it was challenging for schools to understand, here's the data on my multiple pathways. What exactly does that mean? And
Yeah, it
so
sounded like it was a data dump. I'm pressed
I
for
wouldn't
time.
describe it as a data dump, but I do think we have made efforts to make that much clearer for schools.
All right, I think that's important. I was intrigued by Scott Goldstein's testimony about leading indicators, and one of them is teacher turnover. So teacher turnover doesn't necessarily mean that the school's not performing, but it's an indicator that maybe there's something going on. And he gave data with regard to Hope, Eagle, and iDream. He said in a statement at a PCSB meeting last year, I testified in support of including measures of staff satisfaction and educator retention as part of Aspire. But that apparently was rejected. Why?
Thanks for the question, Chairman, excuse me. At this point, it is very challenging for us to be able to receive that information consistently in a way that we could hold schools accountable to that in our framework. We're certainly open to seeing ways that Aspire can be approved over time, but that is not a measure or a set of metrics that we're currently looking at.
Well, we're having a hearing in January on teacher retention and turnover, and we will get data then. I don't know why you can't get data.
That is something
We
that
will
our
get data on the charter sector as well as DCPS. We will have, I think, by school, turnover. So I don't know why you wouldn't have that.
I didn't say that the data were not available. I said it would be challenging for us to get that in a meaningful way to include in our accountability framework. And we did not actually speak to our school leaders about their desire to have that included in our accountability system, but it's certainly an area that we're willing to explore in future iterations of our accountability system.
I'm over my time. Give me just a second. Councilmember Parker?
Thank you, and it's great to see both of you. I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and move as quickly as possible. It sounds like you've made two critical adjustments, one to the timeline, moving things up by 3 months to ensure if there were consequences to the review process, families can still pivot, namely with the lottery, and that makes a lot of sense. Then you also announced that you won't impose new conditions in the same school year, which is what we heard from Ms. Gomez with the iDream charter. Why did you make that last decision? Was it because of that context, or like what prompted that change?
Yeah, thank you. Again, as I mentioned, these were not new conditions that were placed on the school. It was expectations that we had for that particular school year for all of our schools. That being said, we recognize how challenging it is for a school to navigate those expectations, particularly if you did not believe that those were going to be subject to your continuance. And so we have adjusted that perspective, and we are not issuing same year conditions for this review cycle and going forward.
Every school under review currently, is it safe to then assume that should they receive conditions, they will be reevaluated next school year?
So if they are to receive conditions for academic performance, at a minimum, it would be based on the performance at the end of the 26-27 school year, because we're currently in the 25-26 school year.
Got it. Got it. Understood. Another thing that has come up is the lack of communication or regular check-ins. We heard from Paul Public Charter School, and there was some other testimony that school leaders could benefit from more regular conversations versus being asked to present robust data sets within a week's time. You also mentioned to the chairman that you all are resuming publishing that summative evaluation for charters annually. Can you speak to what kind of conversations will come along with those reports? Or are we to assume these are going to be static, like data reports on the charter website? Or are you having conversations with school leaders leading up to their school review process?
Sure, a couple of things. First, we actually published communications to schools about their performance throughout the pandemic. So we're not resuming that. We continued that process. What we are doing is making that more clear for our school leaders and their boards what that information means. We did not publish annually performance against our accountability framework because we were building it and we had paused implementation. So that we look forward to being able to resume beginning this February with the first publishing of our Aspire accountability system. In terms of how we're engaging school leaders, I mentioned in my testimony that we have met. We're doing phone calls, we're doing meetings, we're sharing materials, we've provided guidance about the process. But even more critically, we have actually met already this cycle with any school that has not currently fully met every one of their pathways, a pathway for each year. And that is not to suggest that that school will receive conditions, but it is just for us to be able to have a conversation with those schools boards to say, you are not currently fully on track to meet all of your pathways.
And how regular should we assume those conversations are going to be ongoing?
So we have a staff level conversation where our staff is meeting with staff and leadership of the school. And we also have a meeting with leadership and some members of that school board and members of our school board. So there have been at least 2 meetings yet this school year with schools that have not met a pathway during the review cycle. And we are still waiting for the determinations for the 24-25 school year. And based on that data, we may have yet another conversation with any of those schools.
Okay. So it sounds like there's 2 separate conversations happening with schools not on track. If conditions are provided, it would be for the next school year. I would imagine it would be a similar type of system. And it just seems to me perhaps schools could benefit from more regular check-ins and conversations, should they be off track, how they can be in compliance. I do want to move on. I know there's been a lot of talk about revocation and how devastating that can be to a school community. Is there a tiered process that the PCSB follows leading up to a revocation? I recall in years past, there were schools or LEAs that wanted to absorb another LEA that was in risk of closing. And instead of allowing that, the board decided to close the school. To me, to minimize disruption, it would seem like you would let another LEA that is on track and meeting goals to stand in the gap. So can you just walk me through how you lead or how you come to the decision of revocation versus a less consequential decision?
Well, I would say from the board's perspective, the issue you're talking about, but most recently was with Eagle, and I think we talked about that in terms of the hearing, and I think there was a disagreement between the board and staff about why Eagle was up in front of us in the first place. Part of what we have heard from what you just indicated, as well as what we've heard from the sector, is that they do want an opportunity and they want ways to think about that. So that's why we are rolling out and going to be introducing on Monday, opening up for public comment, a policy that would allow schools to either restructure or to acquire. We just heard it earlier, mergers or acquisitions. I agree, it sounds very businesslike, but I think that's more technical than anything. But we are rolling out a policy. Part of the issue that the board had also when it came to Eagle and previously is that there was no policy. The way that these acquisitions were happening were not transparent. It wasn't clear. We did not feel like the public had an understanding of who was taking advantage of it, who was acquiring schools, what it was looking like, et cetera. So we wanted to have a policy around these procedures so that there is transparency. And as we begin to exercise them, everybody knows what's expected. Everybody knows what they need to meet in terms of expectations. And there's just full understanding by all parties how this would work.
That makes sense. And am I to assume then if an LEA is subject to closure, they can opt for restructuring? Or is that decision still ultimately left up to the charter board to decide whether to revoke the charter or to honor the request to restructure?
Yeah, it's still ultimately up to the board in terms of approving that, but the policy does set out the criteria that we would use when we consider that. So now schools have a clear understanding of how the board will think about those decisions, how the staff recommendation will be created based off those decisions. But a school could begin to have those conversations, at any point that they wanted to. But that's what the policy lays out, because to your point, we didn't have that before. It was unclear how that would work.
Understood. A few other questions. One is about your recusal process. So you made mention that members of the board are former teachers, well, the board and staff, former teachers, school leaders. And it gets to a point where there are so many complicated, intertwined relationships. What is the recusal process when you're going through these very complex charter review processes? And has there ever been an instance where a board member has recused themselves when a school is up for review?
So yes, we have recusals all the time. So we follow the same conflict of interest that every agency board follows in the district. We take our conflicts through BEGA just like every other agency in the district. And we regularly, not just regarding reviews and renewals, but even any discussion about a school or any decision about a school where there is a conflict of interest or there is a relationship there, they recuse themselves. So you can probably go to any of our board meetings and there's probably a recusal.
And is that like required? Like they have to
It is.
recuse, or is it
They have-
subjective?
No, they have to recuse. They cannot participate in the discussion, either pre or post the meeting. They have no relationship whatsoever with that decision in front of us, whether it is as big as a review or renewal, or as small as a notice of concern.
Understood. Last question, and it's about ongoing conversations with board members. This has been something that has been like really important to me as a person that knows individuals on charter boards or charter LEA boards. But how is PCSB thinking about strengthening the communication with board members during the review process? And this is separate than training, but actually ensuring that everybody is following along in the process.
Yes, thank you, council members. So even before the review process, PCSB communicates with boards on a number of items. So for example, we have the qualitative site review, which does ultimately become part of our process, but the outcomes of that review do not just go to the school leader, it goes to the entire board. So the report regarding the performance of a school for the QSR goes to the entire board. Our updates on financial concerns goes to the entire board of a school. There are other reports and actions and oversight activities that we communicate not just with the school leader, but the entire board. Even the discussion today about those mid-year performance communications, that goes to the school leader and the entire board. And it became apparent to us a few years back that while we were having robust conversations with school leaders, and possibly the board chair being copied on all of those communication, not every member of the board was getting that information. And so we made those adjustments early on in the process, and all of that information gives a clearer picture of how the school is performing. And so at the point of the review cycle, yes, the whole board is getting a copy of the final report of the school's performance, but we are engaging in effective organization meetings with members of the board. We may be having conversations with the board chair about particular areas of concern with that school. And so we've certainly beefed up our communication directly with the board and not just through the school leader.
Understood. Thank you. And that is my time.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. So one of the contexts here, one of the challenges that we face is that we have a lot of excess capacity. And there was a time, and I'm going to turn to revocations and closures. But there was a time when, you know, that in my opinion, the charter board was continuing to open new schools at a time when there already was excess capacity. I don't think that's happening now. I think it's been a bit since you guys have been opening new schools, but I'm curious how you are seeing over the horizon in terms of opening and expanding schools in a context where I think there's like 59, 60,000 charter seats, about 48,000 of them are used, 12,000 are not being used at this point. How are you thinking about expansions?
Thank you, Councilmember Freeman. You and I have had conversations about our differences of opinion about capacity, but I want to focus on the heart of your question, which is how are we thinking about expansion, et cetera. So you've heard from Chair Wright, one of the new policies that are being introduced in our ecosystem here, which is to provide alternatives to closure for low-performing schools. But I also want to highlight that that policy is about higher performing schools that are looking at new ways to combine and restructure as well. And I think that that gets at the reality of what we're seeing across the district around enrollment challenges, not just within our charter sector, but also in the traditional schools. And so that is one of the ways that we are introducing opportunities for schools to be creative about what they are offering and the programming in the context of what we're seeing in our community. Secondly, I've spoken before to this committee about the work that we've done to improve our charter application process, not only to beef up the standards in terms of the rigor for opening a new school, but also to be reflective on need and demand in the city, and for our charter applicants to demonstrate how they would be contributing and meeting the needs and demands that our families and communities have expressed. And then lastly, we're also looking at our expansion policy, following those same fundamental guiding principles for our merger and acquisition policy, our charter application process, policy. When we're thinking about how schools expand, we're thinking about how are they addressing the needs and demands that exist in our community, and how are they taking into consideration the charter schools and traditional schools that already exist in our ecosystem. So I feel really proud of the work that we're doing and the engagement that we've had with our stakeholders about ways to be really thoughtful about maintaining all of the progress and the success that charter schools have brought to the community, but to be thoughtful about what growth looks like in our current context.
So will I have more of a window into this when I see this merger policy that comes out in a week?
So yes, you will have a window into how we're thinking about those configurations and combinations of schools, but more importantly, our charter application has been updated, and you could look at what we've done there in terms of aligning that to need and demand. And then we will be looking at our expansion policy over the next few months as well.
So in terms of mergers and restructurings, does your policy contemplate possible mergers into DCPS?
Our policy does not contemplate that at this moment. It is structured in ways to support charter schools, thinking about mergers with themselves.
Okay, and
so it does not.
To the extent, one of the challenges that we have, I mean, you have challenges around buildings, and we have challenges. We may differ about the magnitude of the unused capacity, but there is some unused capacity, as you know. To what extent, if there is a restructuring, is there an encouragement of absorption or maintaining two separate buildings with the cost of those that might not be 100% full, with the cost of those buildings and the cost of administration? To what extent in the restructuring process are you looking at economic efficiencies?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So just to clarify, the policy creates a pathway for schools to entertain as it's drafted. I want to be clear, this policy is being open for public comment beginning next Monday, and then it will go through our typical process with the board being before our board for a vote in December. But as it is currently drafted, the policy entertains pathways for schools to merge, pathways for a standard acquisition, or pathways for an emergency acquisition. It does not speak to the facilities in the policy itself, but any plan where schools are being combined, they will have to demonstrate academic preparedness, financial preparedness, capacity to execute on that merger or acquisition. And so that's at that point in the process is where we would have conversations about it. But it does not, as the policy is currently drafted, it is not predetermined any conversation about what facilities look like.
So, I mean, you know where I am coming from on this. For years, I have thought that we need to have greater coordination, and we need to have a sense of planning about how we're going to meet actual needs, and that there is a cost to excess capacity because it makes it harder to finance education for all of our kids to the extent that we have inefficiencies built into the system. So I hope that you all will be partners in trying to address that issue that isn't just in the charter sector, but the charter sector contributes to it. If we stayed on a path that we were on before, I think it dilutes our ability to serve all of our children, and we have to be hard-headed about how we're maintaining capacity, expanding or contracting capacity in order to best serve our kids.
Yeah,
And in
I would
that,
say Oh, sorry.
You go. No, please, please, please.
I would just say that we are hopeful that our suite of sector planning policies allow our charter schools to leverage the resources that already exist in the charter sector, that we can be thoughtful and efficient about how we are using those resources, and most importantly, that we can maximize all of the talent that we have in the charter sector to better serve our students. So that is the goal of thinking about all of those policies together.
Okay, Aspire, what percentage of your LEAs have signed up for Aspire as opposed to are relying on the old mechanism?
So we are now in the process of beginning adoption. At our upcoming board meeting, we'll actually have 2 LEAs who are on our agenda to adopt Aspire, and we anticipate that there will be more of our schools looking to do so during this school year. I want to say that this is the first year that we will begin publishing data against Aspire, and so we're looking forward to many schools using this accountability system as their goals, as they did with our previous accountability system.
Okay, and then in terms of Aspire and in terms of your evaluation of LEAs, the teacher turnover issues, that's a drum that's been banged a couple of different times. A couple of other metrics that I think could be important, and I'd be curious your reaction, would be discipline and suspension. I would think that you would want to know what's happening there. You're already tracking attendance, but mid-year mobility, I think, to what extent are many students, just like a teacher's leaving a school, to what extent are students leaving the school? And performance on special education has been a flashpoint over the years. To what extent are you looking at those things and incorporating them into your evaluation, or would you be open to doing so?
Sure. So our Aspire framework does account for re-enrollment, not currently mid-year withdrawal, but it does account for re-enrollment, and that is a metric or measure that we've carried over from our performance management framework. In terms of special education, I'm really excited about the way that we have structured our accountability system to give greater weight to the performance of some of our student groups, those furthest from opportunity, and that includes our students with disabilities, it includes our English language learners, it includes economically disadvantaged students. And so I'm really excited about the way that, and this actually came from feedback from our LEAs as well, that we prioritize the school student populations that are furthest from opportunity and give greater weight to their performance in our accountability framework.
Okay. Well, I do think those are important metrics, and I hope that they will be key focuses. In the revocation process, there's a number of times the chairman mentioned how often has it been that a charter has violated the law, and I hope that's very, very few, but failed to meet charter goals. Sometimes the charter can have very ambitious goals when it is initiated. I took a quick look and saw a number. So to what extent, to the extent that 15 years ago, somebody put forward very ambitious goals, but they have not met them, does that mean that you must revoke their charter?
So I will reiterate what I said in our testimony. The board has very little discretion at the 15-year renewal the board has no discretion at the 15-year renewal to continue a charter that does not meet its goals. That being said, at every 5 years, a 5-year interval, and sometimes more depending on the performance of the school, we do have an opportunity to review the school and have a robust conversation about their performance. The schools also have an opportunity during their review, during their life cycle, to amend their goals and adjust their goals for those that they think are reasonable for them to achieve. And so those have happened where schools have begun with their charter and realized over time that they wanted to make adjustments to their goals. And of course, we have rules around when and how a school can do that. But there have been many instances where schools began with a set of goals that have changed over time. But regardless of at what point they have adjusted those goals, at the point of review, at the point of renewal, when we are engaging with a school, we are assessing whether or not they have met the goals in their charter And if they have not, the board has little discretion, no discretion to continue that school.
I mean, that's where it shifts around a little because what I'm hearing you say is that if there were very ambitious goals set 15 years ago, they may have been changed. And then in terms of revocation, the review would be relative to the change, not relative to the original goals if they've formally amended. And in the spirit of the whole thing, actually troubles me because a promise is made at the time of approval and it could be grandiose. And then if the achievement is far short of the grandiose, you can move the goalposts back later on to say that the goal is something different. And that's not the bargain on which the opening happened in the first place. That's a little editorializing, and I'm well over time, and you're late for your next thing, and another council member has arrived. But I'll give you a chance to react to that and then be done.
Yeah, I mean, the school is not changing its goals on its own. This is a negotiation and ultimately approval by PCSB. And so we have an opportunity to determine if those goals meet the spirit of the charter application, meet the program of the school. And so I don't think that it is moving the goalpost or perhaps even making it easier. And I do want to point out that many of our schools have adopted our performance management framework, which is a consistent measure that we have across all of our schools. And so as you know, the performance management framework was a pretty high bar, and I believe Aspire is an even stronger reflection of what we value in terms of the performance of our schools. So I don't think that there is risk there of somehow schools having an easier path than what they originally set out to do.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you. Dr. Walker Davis, Ms. Wright, I apologize. I know you weren't expecting to see another council member, but I just couldn't help myself. I'm going to be brief, so y'all be brief too, so we can get out on time. Okay, so since 1999, roughly 70 public charter LEAs in the district have closed. 29 of those schools cited academic reasons for some particular part of their closure. Hope Community Public Charter Schools, I would say, is the latest of that. They closed at the end of school year 24-25. And they were also one of those schools that cited the inability to meet the academic requirements as one of the reasons that the board decided to relinquish their charter. Do you recall, Dr. Walker Davis, or even Chair Wright, where was Hope in sort of the renewal cycle or monitoring cycle? What year were they?
I believe, and I can confirm this, I believe Hope was a 20
I think it was 20. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was 20.
So it was a 20. Okay. So I guess the question is, for this particular LEA, at what point did the board know we've got a problem?
Our board or their board?
Well, I mean, that's a good question. Their board obviously isn't here. So I would say for you all as the authorizer, at what point in that cycle did you say, okay, academically, we have some concerns here?
Yeah, I mean, I noted earlier in the testimony how challenging it is to have had conversations about academic performance during the pandemic. But at each point that we shared the annual performance with the school, we indicated to the school what their performance was, and we were tracking which schools were on target or off target to fully meet their pathway. And so we knew at the end of the first year that there were some potential challenges in that the school did not fully meet a pathway. Similarly, in the second year, we identified that the school did not fully meet a pathway. Those are indications of their academic performance. It does not necessarily mean that the school is automatically up for closure. And in fact, we offered conditions to Hope Community so that they could improve. Again, conditions based on expectations that were already set for that school. And so I would say that was our indication, and that was also the foundation of our communication with the school.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about that. Ms. Wright, you mentioned in your testimony that you discuss rather how PCSB can vote to continue a charter with time-bound conditions for improvement after completing a 5-year plan. And you say like this is to make sure that concerning schools are continuing to make progress. Can you describe sort of the level of oversight the board exercises when you have those types of situations?
Yes, and before I do, I also want to let you all know that Dr. Walker Davis and I have adjusted our schedule on this end so we can continue to engage with the council as needed. But to your question, Chairman, Chair, Council Member, I
Yes.
apologize, Council Member Henderson, can you repeat your question for me again? Because say it again.
Oh, sure. You mentioned in your testimony talking about how PCSB can vote to continue a charter with time-bound conditions for improvement after completing the 5-year plan. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit more about what the level of oversight looks like when you have a school in that type of situation.
Okay, I think Dr. Walker Davis may be better prepared to talk about how the staff actually looks at it, but I know that school then each year, because depending on the time bound condition, and generally they're year-over-year conditions based off performance for the school year, has to come before that board to note whether or not it has met that condition. So the staff will review the academics, the finance, the performance, and make a recommendation to us showing whether or not they have actually met that condition. And the board will review the recommendation from the staff, bring the school before the dais about its performance and whether or not it's met it, and make a vote to either, again, continue, or if they didn't meet it, to potentially move to revocation. But in terms of what the oversight looks like throughout that year, that's probably better for Dr. Walker Davis than me.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to what Chair Wright mentioned is if a school is subject to conditions, we would add a reporting on the performance of that condition to the communications that we give to schools about how they are doing. The condition itself may require additional oversight by PCSB. So for example, it might trigger an audit, it might trigger some sort of ongoing engagement. And so we do those activities. And then lastly, when the school comes up for its next review, we would include the progress on those conditions in our analysis of the school's performance for that review cycle.
Okay. When you have a school that's kind of in this particular situation, right, time-bound conditions for improvements and otherwise, at what point is there a level of communication with the school community about what's going on? And I know that's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, right, you don't want to start a fire sale of people being like, we got to pack it up. And then it does actually drive to closure because simply from an enrollment standpoint, they cannot make it work. But at the same time, right, families deserve to have some type of understanding that like, so I don't get into a situation of like hope where it's the end of the school year, the lottery's already done, and now I have very few options where if I had known a little bit earlier, I could have exercised my choice.
Yeah, it is a valid question, council member. You may have noticed that in our review cycle last year, we added as part of the condition a requirement that our schools inform their communities using a template by PCSB that they were subject to conditions. And you're right, there is a concern about what that might mean in terms of actual self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of encouraging parents to flee, but ultimately we want parents to have informed information so that they can make the right choices for their family. I do think that when we get to a place of having more publicly available annual progress on schools, that there is going to be a place where families can understand the progress of their school, even outside of a review cycle, and have that information on a regular basis to navigate the choice process annually, whether or not their school is up for review. But we did have expectations in the last review cycle for specific communication to schools. And we would hope that schools are doing this regularly, and our schools do this regularly, communicate with families about how they're doing. It's part of our work also in looking at board meeting minutes and looking at how schools are conducting their board meetings. We would hope that at every board meeting, there is some communication with the school community about the academic performance, and that the first time families are hearing about the potential outcome of a review is not at the time of a review.
Okay.
And Councilman Henderson, if I may, part of what was important to this board, if you look, as Dr. Walker Davis said, we actually added a condition of noticing to families about the state of the school, because we do believe that families have a right to know what is going on in their schools. And just like we communicate with families when we celebrate, we should also partner with our schools and communicate when we're struggling so that parents can know what's going on and be a support. We should not be afraid to tell our families what is happening in our schools. So one, that they can partner with us, and so that they can also make informed decisions.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I want to ask, in my last 1 minute and 30 seconds here, about, Ms. Wright, you mentioned in your testimony, you all are developing a formal policy to guide the board on how you consider requests from schools to restructure their programs as an alternative to closing low-performing schools. Obviously, this came up a little bit in terms of the Eagle Academy situation, which I think perhaps prompted you all to say, we need a formal policy on this. What's the timeline on that, and what do you envision it looking like?
Yeah, so we're going to open it up for public comment on Monday. And our hope is, based off of public comment, we're obviously going to take that and receive that and revise the policy accordingly. Our hope is that we could actually have it up for vote and ready for implementation as early as our December board meeting. But again, it also depends. We are going to take feedback. This is an important policy that will have an impact for years to come in the district. And so we want to hear from as many people as possible about what you want to see and what is important. But that's our goal, and our hope would be that we'd have it in place before the lottery, so that if schools do need to make a decision or it needs to be implemented, they have that tool at their disposal.
Great, thank you so much. And I want to also say thank you to both of you for taking that step after a couple of what I feel like back-to-back abrupt situations that occur for school communities, that now we need to just have a policy in place to better handle those situations. So, but thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson. A few more questions from me. With regard to Aspire, the newly adopted performance management framework, Aspire, is part of PCSB's ongoing review and renewal process. Although it hasn't been fully implemented yet, changes are already anticipated with the upcoming shift to Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, that is the SBAC assessments. How will PCSB account for the transition to a new district-wide assessment in their charter school reviews and renewals?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll start. So yes, we are working with OSSI right now to better understand the broader, and our school leaders, the broader implications of the shift in assessment. It will have an impact on our framework. As you know, our framework does include both standardized tests, both in terms of proficiency and growth. And in fact, growth is a much greater part of our performance framework. And so when the shift is made to that new assessment, there will be challenges in getting the same type of growth data that we've gotten in the past. And so we've already stood up working groups with our LEAs. We have a technical advisory group of local and national experts on accountability systems, and we'll be working over the next few months to determine what specific shifts we're going to have to make to our accountability framework to account for the shift in the assessment. But there will be an impact, yes.
So there'll be an impact, but it's not like looking at growth and proficiency is going to be tossed out the window for a few years. You'll just have to figure out how to compare the two assessments.
It is possible, as we've seen in the past with shifts in assessments, that we will have to hold harmless for a period of time or make some other type of adjustment. I can't commit to what specifically we're going to do at this point because we are in the process of figuring that out, but we could look to our past practice when the city shifted from DC CAS to Park, for example. There were some changes that were necessary, both in the structure of our accountability system, but also how we held schools accountable for that particular year or years that the shift occurred. So that is possible, and it is something that is on the table that we are exploring.
Well, I think hold harmless could be a mistake because, I mean, just today we've heard that the gap because there were no tests at all, was problematic for some schools. Let me see. Let me ask a different question. When a school's in trouble, or for whatever reason, but usually it seems to be when it's in trouble, sometimes there's a merger. That is, another school will take it over. How is that school that's taken over held to charter requirements? Because its charter was relinquished. And the school that takes it over, its charter didn't actually include that school. So what do you do?
Yes, I will take a stab at this question and try not to sound too overly technical, but there are provisions that we have in our charter goals policy that dictate if a school is an acquiring school and there are certain percentages of students that come from the new school, like there are adjustments that we could make in our calculation of the performance of the school to account for it. Similar to how we might handle a school that just opened, there's a different way that we focus on accountability if you are a first-year school versus if you are a five-year school. So we've accounted for what could happen under those circumstances, and I'll stop now so I don't sound overly technical about that.
So the school that was acquired is no longer held to the goals that were in its charter.
If the school is closed or relinquished, they would not be held to those goals. We would be thinking about what the new combination school would be and how that school would be held accountable. Yes, that's correct.
And what if the acquiring school decides that it no longer, that it's dissatisfied with this school that it acquired? Does it relinquish something or what? Or does it just simply go to the board and say, we're going to shrink back down?
That has not happened. Once the school has acquired the previous school, we are having conversations about that current school. And so any changes that are happening at that school, we are reflecting on the performance of that school. Now, parents may decide that they do not want to attend that school and make different enrollment decisions, but the school is being held accountable for its performance as a newly combined entity.
I think I'll leave that there for the moment. So I'm looking at the themes that have come up at this hearing. Timeline and alignment. Dr. Walker Davis, it's your testimony and Ms. Wright, your testimony that the Public Charter School Board is moving earlier in the season its review and renewal decisions. Moving them as early as, there was some testimony, I think like October, November.
I believe that testimony was about previous practice. We have
Yes,
moved our
it was.
timeline. Yes, we have moved our timeline up. We may have a hearing as early as December, but certainly our process will begin in January. And I'll recall that last cycle, we began our first review in March. And so we are aiming to have our decisions, particularly for those that may have an impact in a potential high stakes conditions or revocation, as early as possible so that families are able to navigate the lottery process if they need to. And so December would be the earliest that we would have a hearing.
So early as possible could be December.
Yes.
Why not as early as in 2015 with Ideal, which was October?
As has been mentioned before, in 2015, we were in a space where we had the performance management framework, we had consistent available data to us. We are not in that space right now. And so we have to account for all of the years in the review period, which include years where we had multiple pathways. And we will also be looking at not just the performance of the individual school, even if we have data about one individual school, that has to be set in the context of the performance of all of our schools. And schools need to be able to validate the information that is available for us to make a final determination. So we're still waiting on being able to do that for all of our 24-25 data. And once we have that, we'll be able to make determinations about how all of our schools have performed for the 24-25 school year.
Well, I think this is going to still be an issue then. There also was testimony about transparency and clarity. And I think it was your testimony, Dr. Walker Davis, that the there will be, how do I want to put it, more complete and judgmental annual evaluations given to schools so that they're less likely to be caught by surprise.
Yes, more clear takeaways from the data that we provide to the school.
There was also testimony about consistency. I don't know that I asked you about that. What's your reaction to that? That conditions and recommendations have not always been applied consistently across schools?
Yes, so we made every effort to ensure that our conditions were in fact similar for similarly situated schools. That being said, I do want to reiterate what Mr. Roush said about the particular factors of a school. And if conditions are designed to make a school improve, we have to take into consideration the underlying performance of that school. And so we did both of those things in applying conditions to our schools. I do recognize that some schools may not have understood why particular schools got one set of conditions and others did not, but I guarantee that those were reflective of what were the options available for this school to demonstrate success, meaning what pathways were available to that particular school to achieve, and how did that particular school perform against those pathways when compared to other schools. So we did make that effort, but I do know that we're in a transitional time. It is really hard for all of our schools to understand not only how they are performing on their pathways, but in the absence of public reporting about all schools, you may believe that you are similarly situated to another school, but you actually don't know the underlying data of that school to make that determination that you are in fact performing in the same way.
The other point that came out in a lot of the testimony is discrepancies in data. And I didn't ask you about that earlier. Why would there be data discrepancies, or what is PCSB doing to reduce that?
Yes, so we made a lot of efforts to improve our internal data systems, to improve our communication with OSSI, where we get the majority of our academic performance data, and also to tighten our timelines and turnaround time. I would certainly acknowledge that we had some challenges last school year. And part of our process is, again, not just to look at the data for an individual school, but a lot of our assessment of the performance of our charter schools is relative to how the schools perform against other schools, how the schools perform against schools across the state. And so it is important not just to have the data from a handful of schools, but to have the data from all of our schools to be able to make that assessment. And so if an individual school, for example, has an appeal with OSSI about their data, we need to wait till that appeal timeline has been done, that we have that information, that we're able to validate it, and then make an assessment about that school against all of ours. And so that is a time-intensive process. It's a time-intensive process for PCSB. It certainly is one for the schools as well, but it is necessary that we have that level of accuracy, particularly if we're going to make tough decisions about our schools. And we've done a lot already to improve that process, and we are working to improve it even more. And most importantly, working with OSSI to see if there's any way statewide, citywide, that we can get data as early as possible so that we can move the timeline even earlier than what we have already done.
Which I think would be good. I can tell you that this week, with regard to other issues, this delay because of data is a bit frustrating. Government needs to be able to move more quickly. I'm going to leave it at that. I don't have any other questions and I don't have any other colleagues here. So let me conclude this hearing. I do want to thank you, Ms. Wright and Dr. Walker Davis, that we kept you longer than you had originally said. So I appreciate that. This has been a hearing on charter school review and renewal in the district. The record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, anyone who wishes to submit anything for the record has until 5 p.m. on Wednesday, November 5th, 2025. The time is 1:17 in the afternoon, and this hearing